During my annual review, my wife's dad, the CEO, Jim Tanner, said, "We're cutting your salary in half. Take it or leave it." I said, "I understand. When does this take effect?" Immediately, he smirked. I nodded and said, "Perfect timing." He had no idea that I'd already been recruited by his biggest competitor. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and instantly know you're about to get screwed? Yeah, well, welcome to my Tuesday morning. The executive boardroom at Tanner Industries reeked of polished oak and that burnt coffee smell that comes from leaving the pot on since 6 a.m. Real classy joint, this place. Nothing says, "We're successful," quite like furniture that costs more than most people's cars and coffee that tastes like it was filtered through an old gym sock. My father-in-law, Jim Tanner, CEO extraordinaire and professional pain in my ass, was already planted in his oversized leather throne when I walked in. This chair wasn't just furniture. It was a statement piece. The kind of chair that screams, "I own this place and everyone in it." Which, to be fair, he pretty much did. The man had built Tanner Industries from the ground up, turning a small logistics company into a regional powerhouse that moved everything from auto parts to industrial equipment. Respect where it's due, the guy knew how to run a business. Too bad, he was also a grade A manipulative bastard who treated family dinners like hostile takeovers. Jim didn't even look up from his paperwork when I took my seat across from him. Classic power move. Make the other guy wait while you shuffle through documents that probably say nothing more important than, "Remember to pick up dry cleaning." I'd been on the receiving end of this particular theater performance enough times to know the script. First, the uncomfortable silence. Then, the dramatic eye contact. Finally, the verbal gut punch delivered with all the warmth of a tax audit. "Marcus," he said, finally gracing me with his attention. His voice had that flat, emotionless quality that rich guys perfect when they're about to ruin someone's day. "Let's get straight to business." "Oh, here we go." I leaned back in my chair, mirroring his casual posture. After 15 years of dealing with Jim Tanner's corporate theater, I'd learned to play along. "Sure thing, Jim. What's on your mind?" He didn't waste time on pleasantries, never did. Jim was the kind of guy who probably charged his own mother for Christmas dinner. "We're cutting your salary in half, Marcus," he announced like he was discussing the weather. "Take it or leave it." And there it was. The moment I'd been half expecting for months, delivered with all the ceremony of ordering a sandwich. 15 years of loyalty, late nights, missed family dinners, weekend calls, holiday emergencies. All of it brushed aside like lint on an expensive suit. 15 years of making this company millions while he took the credit, and I took the blame when things went sideways. I kept my face neutral, a skill I'd perfected during countless family gatherings where Jim's idea of small talk involved reminding everyone how generous he was for letting me marry his daughter. "I understand," I replied, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. Inside, I was doing cartwheels. This arrogant son of a bitch had just handed me the best gift of my professional life, and he didn't even know it. Jim's smirk spread across his face like oil on water. He thought he'd crushed me, thought he'd finally put the outsider in his place. The man practically glowed with satisfaction, probably already planning how he'd tell this story at the country club. "Poor Marcus couldn't handle the pressure," he'd say. "Had to cut his salary just to keep him around." The other old boys would nod and agree that family businesses were tough, that sometimes you had to make hard choices. "It takes effect immediately," he continued, clearly savoring every word. The immediacy wasn't about cash flow or budget constraints. Tanner Industries was pulling in more money than ever. This was about power, about reminding me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. Spoiler alert, it wasn't at the top. I nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Perfect timing," I said. Those two words hung in the air between us like smoke from a cigarette. Jim's smirk faltered for just a second, not long enough for anyone else to notice, but I caught it. He didn't know what I meant, and that little flicker of uncertainty was delicious. See, Jim Tanner might have been a business genius, but he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd underestimated me. For months, I'd been watching the cracks in his empire. Suppliers getting restless over delayed payments. Key clients grumbling about service issues. Employees jumping ship to competitors. Jim was so busy playing king of the mountain that he'd stopped paying attention to the avalanche building beneath his feet. And me? I'd been taking notes. The thing about being the family outsider is that you learn to see things differently. While the Tanner boys, Claire's brothers Brendan and Oliver, were busy kissing Daddy's ring and playing office politics, I was actually working, building relationships with suppliers, solving client problems, keeping the wheels turning. Jim took credit for my wins and blamed me for every setback. But the people doing the real work? They knew who was actually running the show. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss? I asked, standing up from my chair with the kind of calm confidence that probably made him wonder if I'd suffered a concussion on the way to his office. Jim waved a dismissive hand. That's all, Marcus. I'm sure you understand the position the company is in. The position the company was in. Right. The company that had just posted record quarterly profits was apparently so strapped for cash that they needed to slash my salary. Makes perfect sense when you don't think about it at all. I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the brass handle. Jim, I said, turning back to face him, I want you to know that I really do appreciate everything you've done for me. His chest puffed up like a peacock's. The man lived for moments like this, when the help showed proper gratitude. Well, Marcus, I've always tried to take care of family. Family. The word tasted like cheap wine and broken promises. I was family when he needed someone to clean up a client crisis at 2 a.m. on a Sunday. I was family when quarterly numbers needed massaging. But when it came time for credit or respect or basic human decency, suddenly, I was just the guy who married his daughter. Absolutely, I agreed. You've really opened my eyes to a lot of things. Jim nodded sagely, completely missing the double meaning. For a smart businessman, the guy had a remarkable blind spot when it came to reading people. Maybe it came from 30 years of surrounding himself with yes-men and family members who depended on his approval for their livelihoods. As I walked out of his office, I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I'd been avoiding for weeks. Lydia Wilkes, COO of Wilkes Global, Tanner Industries' biggest competitor and biggest pain in Jim's ass. She'd been trying to poach me for months, making offers that would have made Jim's head spin. Up until today, I'd been playing the loyal soldier, the grateful son-in-law, the team player. But you know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and megalomaniacal father-in-laws? Sometimes they blow up in your face in the most spectacular way possible. I typed out a quick message. Lydia, let's talk. That offer's still on the table. Her response came back in less than 30 seconds. Always. When can you start? I looked back at Jim's office door, imagining him in there, probably already planning his next power play, secure in the knowledge that he'd put me in my place. Poor bastard had no idea that he'd just lit the fuse on his own empire. How about we discuss details over lunch? I typed back. I've got some interesting insights about market opportunities you might find useful. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, I like where this is going. Noon at the Marriott downtown. Perfect, I replied. See you there. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and headed toward my office. Correction, my soon-to-be former office, with a spring in my step that hadn't been there in months. Jim Tanner thought he was playing chess while I was playing checkers. What he didn't realize was that I'd been playing an entirely different game all along. The elevator doors closed behind me, and I caught my reflection in the polished steel. For the first time in years, the guy staring back looked like someone who was about to win. Jim wanted to cut my salary in half. Fine. I was about to cut him out of the picture entirely. Game on, old man. Game on. Let me paint you a picture of my so-called perfect life before you start feeling too sorry for poor old Marcus getting his salary chopped in half. On paper. And trust me, Jim loved putting things on paper so he could frame them and hang them on his ego wall. I had it all. Executive Vice President of Operations, corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown, company BMW that still had that new leather smell, and a salary that made my college buddies green with envy every time we grabbed beers. Oh, and I was married to Claire Tanner, the princess of the industrial supply kingdom. Blonde, beautiful, and born with a platinum spoon so far up her ass that she could taste the family crest. To everyone on the outside looking in, I was living the American dream with a capital D and a side of, how the hell did that guy get so lucky? Here's the thing about golden cages, though, they're still cages. And after 15 years of being the dancing monkey in Jim Tanner's 3-ring circus, the gilding had worn pretty damn thin. Every single success I'd managed to pull off got twisted into some brilliant example of Jim's mentorship and guidance. Remember that Patterson Industries deal that saved our asses during the 2019 slowdown? The one where I spent 3 months schmoozing their purchasing director and basically lived in hotel conference rooms hammering out terms? Yeah, according to the company newsletter, that was all thanks to CEO Jim Tanner's strategic vision and leadership excellence. My name appeared in the fine print, if at all, usually somewhere between special thanks to the janitorial staff and don't forget to validate your parking. But every failure, every client who walked away, every supplier who got pissy about payment terms, every time a delivery truck broke down in the middle of nowhere, that was all Marcus Sullivan, folks. Front page news, complete with a detailed analysis of my learning opportunities and areas for professional growth. Jim had turned blame shifting into an art form, and I was his favorite canvas. The worst part wasn't even Jim himself. Although the man could give lessons on how to be a condescending prick to middle managers everywhere. No, the real knife in the back came from Claire's brothers, Brendan and Oliver. These two walking trust fund disasters looked at me like I was some kind of charity case who'd somehow conned his way into their exclusive club. Brendan, the older one, had all the business acumen of a decorative houseplant, but somehow held the title of Senior Vice President of Development. His idea of strategic planning involved expensive lunches and golf tournaments where he'd promise clients things that were physically impossible to deliver. Then guess who got to clean up the mess when reality came knocking? That's right, good old Marcus, the family problem solver. Oliver wasn't much better. Junior VP of Finance with a Harvard MBA that his daddy's donations had basically purchased for him. The kid could barely balance his own checkbook, but he sure could lecture me about fiscal responsibility and knowing my place in the organizational structure. Real rich coming from someone whose biggest professional achievement was not accidentally setting the office printer on fire. Family dinners were like psychological warfare disguised as pot roast and small talk. Picture this. Every Sunday at the Tanner estate, a sprawling monument to new money that looked like someone had thrown a colonial mansion and a McMansion into a blender. Jim would hold court at the head of a dining table that could have doubled as a landing strip, dispensing wisdom and passive-aggressive commentary like some kind of industrial supply godfather. Marcus, he'd say, cutting into his steak with surgical precision, you're so lucky to be part of this family. Not everyone gets opportunities like this. Lucky. That word followed me around like a bad smell. Lucky to work 70-hour weeks. Lucky to take the heat when his golden boy screwed up. Lucky to sit at the kids' table of a business I'd helped build while Brendan and Oliver got to play with the grown-ups. Claire would just sit there, sipping her wine and nodding along like one of those dashboard bobbleheads. Dad's right, honey. We're all so fortunate. Fortunate. Another favorite family buzzword. We were fortunate to have Jim's leadership. Fortunate to be part of his vision. Fortunate to shut up and do what we were told without asking inconvenient questions about things like respect or basic human decency. But the real kicker was how they talked about the business itself. According to the official Tanner family mythology, this was a dynasty built on hard work, family values, and good old-fashioned American ingenuity. The reality? Jim had inherited a decent-sized trucking company from his own father-in-law and spent 30 years leveraging other people's money and labor to turn it into something bigger. Not exactly the rags-to-riches story he loved telling at industry conferences. Behind the scenes, Tanner Industries was held together with duct tape, crossed fingers, and my personal willingness to work miracles on a regular basis. While Jim played golf with potential investors and the boys practiced their executive cosplay, I was the one actually keeping the trains running on time. Literally. We had a major rail contract that required precision timing. And guess who spent his weekends coordinating with freight schedulers? The funny thing about being treated like an outsider in your own family business is that it gives you a unique perspective on all the cracks in the foundation. While everyone else was busy playing their assigned roles in the Tanner family drama, I was watching the real show, suppliers getting nervous about payment schedules, key employees updating their LinkedIn profiles, competitors circling like sharks who'd smelled blood in the water. Jim's empire looked solid from the outside, sure. Shiny offices, fancy company vehicles, quarterly reports that made investors happy. But I could see the rot underneath. Outdated systems that hadn't been upgraded since the Clinton administration. A management structure that prioritized family loyalty over actual competence. Client relationships held together by my personal reputation and about 15 years worth of favors that I'd called in to clean up other people's messes. And through it all, I played my part. Loyal son-in-law, dedicated employee, team player who never rocked the boat or asked for more than he deserved. I smiled at Jim's jokes, laughed along when Brendan told stories about his latest business school buddy's startup failure, and pretended not to notice when Oliver accidentally forgot to invite me to strategy meetings. But here's what none of them understood about Marcus Sullivan. I wasn't just some lucky bastard who'd married above his station. I was a guy who'd built his own reputation in this industry, one satisfied client and one successful project at a time. The relationships I'd developed, the trust I'd earned, the expertise I'd gained, none of that belonged to Jim Tanner or his precious family business. That was all mine. So when Jim delivered his little salary ultimatum with that smug expression he reserved for special occasions, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. He thought he was cutting me down to size, putting me in my place, reminding me who held the real power in this relationship. What he'd actually done was hand me the perfect excuse to stop pretending I gave a damn about his approval. The man wanted to play hardball? Fine by me. I'd been warming up in the bullpen for 15 years, just waiting for my turn at bat. And Jim Tanner was about to learn the hard way that sometimes the guy you've been treating like hired help might just be the one person standing between your empire and total collapse. Perfect timing, indeed. The only question now was whether I wanted to watch his world burn slowly or just pour gasoline on the whole thing and enjoy the fireworks. Decisions. So here's the thing about timing. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor that would make a stand-up comedian jealous. 3 weeks before Jim decided to play salary limbo with my paycheck, I was sitting in my office on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon, minding my own business and trying to figure out why our Springfield warehouse kept losing inventory like it was going out of style. That's when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Now, in my line of work, unknown numbers usually meant one of three things: a client with a crisis that needed fixing yesterday, a supplier calling to complain about something that wasn't my fault, or some poor telemarketer who was about to get an earful about interrupting my lunch break. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me pick up. Call it instinct, call it boredom, call it whatever you want. Turns out it was the best decision I'd made in years. Marcus Sullivan, I answered, using my professional voice that suggested I was important enough to be busy but polite enough to take your call. Mr. Sullivan, this is Lydia Wilkes from Wilkes Global. Do you have a few minutes to talk? Holy shit. Lydia Wilkes. The Lydia Wilkes. If Jim Tanner was the king of regional industrial supply, then Lydia was the queen who'd been steadily expanding her territory and making his life miserable for the past 5 years. Wilkes Global had started as a West Coast operation but had been aggressively moving east, snatching up clients and contracts like they were Pokemon cards. Jim mentioned her name at board meetings the way normal people talked about root canals, with obvious pain and a desperate desire for the whole thing to be over. I've got time, I said, suddenly a lot more interested in this conversation than my missing inventory reports. Her voice was smooth, professional, with just a hint of that California confidence that comes from building an empire in one of the most competitive markets in the country. I'll cut right to the chase, Mr. Sullivan. We've been watching your work at Tanner Industries for quite some time. Your reputation in this industry speaks for itself. My reputation. Not Jim's reputation, not the Tanner family legacy, my reputation. When was the last time someone at Tanner Industries had acknowledged that I might actually be good at my job? I'd been there so long that I'd started to wonder if my professional identity had completely merged with Jim's son-in-law who does things. That's very flattering, I replied, leaning back in my chair. What exactly can I do for you, Ms. Wilkes? Call me Lydia. And actually, it's more about what we can do for you. I'm calling because Wilkes Global is planning a major expansion into the Midwest market, and we want someone with your experience and connections to lead the initiative. Lead the initiative. Not assist with, or support, or help implement, lead. As in, be the guy making the actual decisions instead of the guy explaining why someone else's bad decisions weren't working out. The concept was so foreign after 15 years at Tanner Industries that I almost didn't know how to process it. That's interesting, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral while my brain started doing backflips. What would something like that look like? Lydia laughed. And it wasn't one of those fake corporate laughs that sound like someone practicing scales on a broken piano. This was genuine amusement, like she could hear the carefully controlled excitement in my voice. Well, for starters, it would look like you having actual authority over your own projects. Revolutionary concept, I know. Full control over budget allocation, hiring decisions, strategic partnerships, the works. Full control. I'd forgotten what those words even meant. At Tanner Industries, my idea of full control was being allowed to choose which brand of coffee to order for the break room. And even that required approval from the purchasing committee that Jim's nephew ran like his own personal fiefdom. We're not looking for an employee, Marcus, Lydia continued. We want a partner. Someone who can build something from the ground up and has the experience to make it profitable from day one. The compensation package would reflect that level of responsibility. Compensation package. She hadn't thrown out numbers yet, but something in her tone suggested we weren't talking about the kind of salary that gets cut in half during annual reviews. We were talking about the kind of money that comes with equity stakes and performance bonuses and all those other executive perks that Jim kept for family members only. And what makes you think I'd be interested in leaving my current position? I asked, partly because I was curious about her sales pitch and partly because I wanted to see how much she actually knew about my situation at Tanner Industries. There was a pause, just long enough for me to wonder if I'd overplayed my hand. Then Lydia spoke again, and her voice had shifted slightly. Less corporate smoothness, more straight talk. Marcus, I've been in this industry for 20 years. I know talent when I see it, and I also know when that talent is being wasted. From where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been doing the heavy lifting while other people take the credit. That gets old, doesn't it? Damn, either this woman was psychic, or my professional frustration was more obvious than I'd thought. Probably the latter. After 15 years of grinding my teeth through family meetings where my contributions got brushed aside like yesterday's newspaper, I'd probably developed some kind of visible twitch. I'm just saying, she continued, that we've built Wilkes Global by recognizing talent and giving it room to grow. We don't care about family trees or who went to which prep school. We care about results, and your results speak for themselves. Results. Another word that had gotten lost in translation at Tanner Industries, where results apparently mattered less than maintaining the proper chain of command and making sure nobody forgot who signed the paychecks. This is a very interesting conversation, Lydia, I said, which was corporate speak for holy crap, you're offering me everything I've wanted for the past decade. But I hope you understand that I'd need to think about something like this very carefully. Of course, I wouldn't expect anything less from someone with your professional standards. But Marcus, her voice took on a slightly sharper edge. Don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't stay open forever, and frankly, we're not the only ones who've noticed your work. The industry is smaller than most people realize. That last part hit me like a splash of cold water. She was right. The industrial supply world was basically a small town where everyone knew everyone else's business. If Lydia had noticed my situation at Tanner Industries, others probably had too. And if word got around that I was having conversations with competitors, Jim would lose his mind in the most spectacular way possible. I appreciate the call, Lydia, and the confidence you're showing in my abilities. Can I ask how long I'd have to consider this? Take your time, she said, but her tone suggested that take your time had some practical limitations. I'll be honest with you. We're looking to move on this expansion within the next few months. The market conditions are perfect right now, and we don't want to miss our window. But the right person is worth waiting for, and you're the right person. The right person, not the lucky guy who'd married into the family business. Not the outsider who should be grateful for whatever scraps fell off the table. The right person for the job, based on actual qualifications and track record. Novel concept. I understand completely, I replied. And I want you to know that I'm genuinely interested in hearing more details. This isn't just a polite brush-off. Good, Lydia said, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Because I hate polite brush-offs almost as much as I hate wasted potential. I'll email you some preliminary information about the expansion plans. Nothing proprietary, just enough to give you a sense of the scope we're talking about. Fair enough. More than fair. I'll keep an eye out for it. Excellent. And Marcus? I know this might feel like a big decision, but sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. You've spent 15 years proving what you can do within someone else's system. Imagine what you could accomplish when you're actually running the show. Running the show? The phrase echoed in my head long after we'd hung up. I'd been so focused on climbing the ladder at Tanner Industries that I'd almost forgotten there were other ladders out there. Ones that didn't require me to kiss the ring of a megalomaniacal father-in-law who treated me like a glorified intern with a fancy title. I spent the rest of that afternoon staring out my corner office window, watching traffic crawl through downtown like ants carrying crumbs back to the colony. Funny how perspective changes everything. From up here, all those people looked like they were part of some grand plan, everyone knowing their role and playing their part. But I'd bet good money that most of them felt just as trapped in their daily grind as I did in my golden cage. The email from Lydia arrived exactly 43 minutes later, and let me tell you, the woman wasn't kidding about the scope of their expansion plans. We're talking about a full-scale invasion of Jim's territory, complete with distribution centers, client acquisition strategies, and enough startup capital to make my current operating budget look like lunch money. They weren't just planning to compete with Tanner Industries. They were planning to obliterate us. And they wanted me to be the guy holding the demolition charges. That night at dinner, Claire asked me why I seemed distracted. I told her it was just work stuff, nothing important. She nodded and went back to scrolling through Instagram, probably looking at pictures of other executives' wives living their best lives on company yachts and private jets. If only she knew that her husband had just been offered a chance to become one of those executives instead of just pretending to be one. But then again, Claire had never been particularly interested in the details of my professional life unless it affected her shopping budget or social calendar. 3 weeks later, when Jim delivered his salary ultimatum with all the subtlety of a brick through a window, I couldn't help but think about Lydia's words. Sometimes the biggest risk is not taking any risks at all. Turns out she was right about something else too. Perfect timing really is everything. You want to know when a marriage is really over? It's not during the screaming fights or the dramatic door-slamming exits you see in movies. Nope. It's during those quiet moments when your spouse looks right through you like you're a piece of furniture that needs dusting. That's exactly what happened the night I came home to tell Claire about her daddy's little salary surprise. I walked into our McMansion, and yeah, I'm calling it a McMansion because that's exactly what it was, despite Claire's insistence on calling it our family estate, expecting at least some basic human sympathy. Maybe a "that sucks, honey," or "what the hell is dad thinking?" Hell, I would have settled for eye contact and a grunt of acknowledgement. What I got instead was Claire curled up on our oversized sectional sofa with a glass of Chardonnay that probably cost more than most people's car payments, scrolling through her phone like I was an Uber driver who'd just told her about traffic delays. "Hey babe," I said, loosening my tie and trying to sound casual. "How was your day?" "Fine," she mumbled without looking up. Her attention was completely absorbed by whatever was happening on her Instagram feed. Probably checking out photos from her college roommate's latest vacation to the Hamptons or some influencer's sponsored post about skincare routines. You know, the really important stuff that requires laser focus. I poured myself a bourbon, the good stuff that Jim had given me for Christmas, probably so he could remind me later how generous he was, and sat down next to her. "So, I had an interesting meeting with your dad today." That got about half a second of eye contact before she went back to her phone. "Oh yeah? How's work going?" "How's work going?" Like I was some middle manager she'd met at a cocktail party instead of her husband of 12 years. "Well, funny you should ask. Your father decided to cut my salary in half." I expected shock, outrage, maybe even some choice words about her father's management style. What I got was Claire taking a sip of wine and shrugging like I'd just told her the mailman was running late. "Dad knows best," she said, still not bothering to look at me. "He's been running that company since before either of us was born. If he thinks this is necessary, then you'll adjust." "You'll adjust." Not, "we'll figure this out together," or "that seems unfair," or even "wow, that sucks." Just a casual dismissal wrapped up in blind family loyalty. Like I was some kind of financial inconvenience that could be solved with a little belt tightening and positive thinking. "Claire," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "we're talking about a 50% pay cut here. That's not exactly adjusting the thermostat. That's restructuring our entire lifestyle." She finally looked up from her phone, and for a hot second, I thought maybe we were going to have an actual conversation. Instead, she gave me that patronizing smile she'd perfected at charity luncheons. "Marcus, you're being dramatic. Dad wouldn't do anything that wasn't in the best interest of the company. And what's good for the company is good for our family. What's good for the company is good for our family. Jesus Christ, she sounded like a corporate press release with better hair. I married Claire Tanner thinking I was getting a partner, someone who'd have my back when things got tough. What I'd actually gotten was Jim's press secretary with benefits. Besides, she continued, settling back into her phone scrolling position, it's not like we're going to be living on food stamps. You still make more than most people. Most people. There it was, the classic rich person's perspective that completely missed the point. Sure, even with the pay cut, I'd still be making decent money. But that wasn't what this was about, and the fact that she couldn't see that told me everything I needed to know about where her priorities lay. I went upstairs to change out of my work clothes, and that's when I made the mistake of checking my phone. There was a notification from a group chat that I wasn't supposed to be part of. One of those family threads that Claire's brothers used to coordinate their weekend plans and share inside jokes. Somehow, I'd gotten added to it months ago, probably by accident, and nobody had bothered to remove me. Usually, I ignored it because listening to Brendan and Oliver plan their golf outings was about as exciting as watching paint dry in slow motion. But tonight's conversation was different. Tonight, they were talking about me. Brendan, did you guys hear about Marcus getting his salary cut? Faced with tears of joy. Oliver, Dad finally put him in his place. About time someone reminded Charity Case Marcus where he stands in the family hierarchy. Brendan, think he'll quit? Crossed fingers. Oliver, doubt it. Where else is he going to make that kind of money? Dad's got him by the balls, and he knows it. Brendan, true. Plus Claire would never leave the family. Marcus is stuck whether he likes it or not. Charity Case Marcus. That's what they call me behind my back. 15 years of working my ass off, 15 years of making their family business more profitable, 15 years of showing up and doing the job. And to them, I was still just the charity case who'd gotten lucky enough to marry their sister. I sat on the edge of our king-sized bed, staring at that group chat until the words started blurring together. The worst part wasn't even the insults. I'd suspected for years that this was how they really felt about me. The worst part was the casual assumption that I was trapped, that I had nowhere else to go, that I'd just sit there and take whatever they dished out because I needed them more than they needed me. Claire walked into the bedroom about an hour later, fresh from what I assumed was her nightly routine of liking Instagram posts and texting her book club friends about whatever they pretend to read this month. She glanced at me sitting there with my phone in my hands and must have noticed something in my expression. "What's wrong now?" she asked, and I swear to God, she made it sound like I was a car that kept making weird noises despite multiple trips to the mechanic. I showed her the group chat. "Your brothers have some interesting thoughts about your husband." She read it over, and for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something like embarrassment flash across her face. But then she handed my phone back and shrugged. "They're just blowing off steam, Marcus. You know how boys are." Boys. These weren't boys. They were grown men in their 30s who held executive positions at a major company. But in Claire's world, apparently, casual cruelty was just boys being boys, and I was supposed to laugh it off like some good-natured hazing ritual. "Claire, they call me a charity case. Your own brothers think your husband is basically a leech who married into money." She sat down at her vanity and started her nighttime skincare routine, addressing my reflection in the mirror instead of actually looking at me. "Marcus, you're being too sensitive. Family teases each other. It doesn't mean anything. Family teases each other. Right? Because nothing says loving family banter quite like calling someone a charity case and betting on whether they'll have the dignity to quit their job. Besides," she added, smoothing some kind of anti-aging cream under her eyes, "you did marry into this family. That's not exactly a secret. And Dad has been incredibly generous with you over the years. Maybe instead of getting upset about silly text messages, you should focus on showing him that you deserve his continued support." Deserve his continued support. Like I was some kind of dependent relative instead of the guy who'd been keeping his business running smoothly while his sons played office and learned important executive skills like expense account management and recreational golf. I realized something sitting there, watching my wife defend her family's casual cruelty while she applied $70 face cream that was supposed to fight the aging process. Claire had never really seen me as her partner. I was an accessory to her lifestyle, a reasonably successful husband who looked good at company parties and didn't embarrass her at charity functions. The fact that I had feelings, ambitions, or professional pride of my own was basically irrelevant to the role I was supposed to play. When I didn't respond immediately, she turned around in her chair and gave me that look, the one that suggested I was being unreasonably difficult about something perfectly obvious. Marcus, you're part of this family now. That means supporting Dad's decisions, even when they're hard to understand. He's built everything we have. Everything we have. Not everything I'd helped build or contributed to. Everything he'd built that we were lucky enough to benefit from. In Claire's mind, I was still just the guy who'd won the lottery by marrying the boss's daughter. That night, lying in bed next to a woman who'd basically told me to shut up and be grateful for the scraps, I kept thinking about Lydia's words. We don't want an employee, we want a partner. Claire never asked how I felt about the salary cut. Never wondered if maybe her father was being unreasonable. Never considered that 15 years of loyalty and hard work might deserve more respect than a casual dismissal and a reminder to know my place. But you know what? That was fine. Because while she was busy being Daddy's little girl, I was starting to remember what it felt like to be Marcus Sullivan, the guy who'd built his own reputation in this industry long before he'd ever heard the name Tanner. And that guy was about to make some very interesting decisions. You know what they say about the best revenge? It's a dish best served cold, with a side of meticulous planning and a garnish of holy shit, I can't believe that just happened. Over the next week, I became the poster child for professional composure. I showed up to work every morning with a smile, attended Jim's painfully boring board meetings without complaint, and even laughed at Brendan's terrible jokes about quarterly projections. To anyone watching, I was the model employee gracefully accepting his reduced circumstances. What they couldn't see was the spreadsheet I was building at home every night, my own personal exit strategy disguised as a simple contact list. Names, phone numbers, email addresses, contract dates, personal details about kids and spouses, and vacation plans. 15 years of relationship building doesn't just disappear because your father-in-law decides to play power games with your paycheck. Take Danny Morrison, for example, head of procurement at Morrison Logistics, one of our biggest clients. Most people saw Danny as just another suit with a purchase order, but I knew he was a divorced dad of twin girls who coached Little League on weekends and had been looking for a more reliable supplier ever since his ex-wife moved to Phoenix with the kids. We'd grab lunch every couple months, and he'd always end up talking about how Tanner Industries was solid, but sometimes slow to adapt to changing market conditions. Marcus, he'd said during our last lunch, picking at his club sandwich like he was defusing a bomb. You guys do good work, don't get me wrong. But sometimes I feel like I'm dealing with a company that's stuck in 1995. Everything takes 3 approval levels and a committee meeting just to change the color of the delivery truck. At the time, I'd made some diplomatic noises about corporate efficiency and process improvement. But now I was thinking about how Danny might react if someone offered him the same quality service with half the bureaucratic bullshit and maybe a 10% discount for switching vendors. Hypothetically speaking, of course. Then there was Sandra Chun, our operations manager who'd been with the company for 8 years and knew our delivery systems better than Jim knew his own golf handicap. Sandra was sharp, efficient, and completely wasted at Tanner Industries, where her suggestions for process improvements usually got buried under layers of, "That's not how we've always done things, and let's table this for the next quarterly review." I made it a point to grab coffee with Sandra that Wednesday, just 2 colleagues catching up on warehouse efficiency metrics and staffing schedules. Nothing suspicious about that, right? You know what's crazy, Marcus, she said, stirring sugar into her coffee with the kind of precision that made her so good at logistics coordination. I've been thinking about updating our entire inventory tracking system. We could cut delivery times by 20% and reduce overhead costs by streamlining the distribution network. But every time I bring it up, Jim wants 3 different feasibility studies and a cost-benefit analysis that takes 6 months to complete. That does sound frustrating, I replied, mentally adding Sandra's name to my growing list of people who might be interested in working for an organization that actually valued innovation over tradition. It is frustrating, she continued. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to work somewhere that actually wanted to improve instead of just maintaining the status quo. You know what I mean? Oh, Sandra. If only you knew how much I understood exactly what you meant. By Friday, I had what you might call a comprehensive overview of Tanner Industries' most valuable assets. And I'm not talking about the warehouses or the truck fleet. I'm talking about the people who actually made things work, the clients who generated revenue, and the suppliers who kept our operations running smoothly. Funny how when you start paying attention to who really drives the business, you realize how much of it has nothing to do with family names or corner offices. My phone had been buzzing with messages from Lydia all week, nothing pushy, just professional follow-ups and additional details about Wilkes Global's expansion timeline. She was smart enough to know that rushing a guy making this kind of decision was a good way to spook him into staying put. But she was also smart enough to keep the conversation going, to make sure I didn't forget about the opportunity while I was busy playing loyal employee. Thursday night, she sent me a text that wasn't quite business and wasn't quite personal. Hope you're having a good week. No pressure on our previous conversation, but I thought you might find this interesting. Attached was a link to an industry article about companies that had successfully expanded into new markets by hiring executives with established regional connections. The article was basically a case study in everything I'd been thinking about. Companies that trusted experienced hires to build new divisions. Executives who'd taken calculated risks and been rewarded with equity stakes and real authority. Success stories that started with someone deciding they were worth more than whatever scraps their current employer was throwing their way. I forwarded the article to my personal email and saved it in a folder I'd labeled Professional Development. Claire never checked my computer anyway. She was too busy managing her own social calendar and planning charity committee meetings where rich wives got together to feel good about donating other people's money to causes they'd never actually volunteer for themselves. The real breakthrough came Friday afternoon during what was supposed to be a routine staff meeting. Jim was holding court at the head of the conference table, explaining his vision for the next quarter like he was revealing the cure for cancer. Brendan and Oliver flanked him like matching bookends, nodding enthusiastically at every pronouncement. The rest of us, the people who actually did the work, sat there taking notes and trying to look interested. Our competitive advantage, Jim declared, gesturing at a PowerPoint slide that looked like it had been designed by a particularly unimaginative intern, lies in our established relationships and time-tested processes. While other companies chase after every new trend, we stick with what works. Established relationships. Time-tested processes. Corporate speak for, we're too lazy and set in our ways to adapt to changing market conditions. I glanced around the table at faces that ranged from politely attentive to barely concealed boredom. These people knew the score. They'd been hearing variations of this same speech for years while watching competitors eat our lunch with better technology and more flexible service options. After the meeting, I lingered in the conference room, pretending to review my notes while everyone else filed out. That's when I overheard Brendan talking to Oliver by the elevator. Dad's really putting the screws to Marcus, Brendan was saying, and he sounded way too pleased about it. Think it'll finally get him to quit. Nah, Oliver replied. Guy's got nowhere else to go. Dad's been carrying him for years. Without the Tanner name backing him up, he's just another middle-aged operations guy with a decent resume. Just another middle-aged operations guy. That's how they saw me. Interchangeable, disposable, completely dependent on their family's generosity for my professional survival. The fact that I'd been the one actually building and maintaining most of those established relationships Jim loved bragging about was apparently irrelevant. That night, I sat in my home office and opened up a fresh document on my computer. Not a resignation letter. I wasn't quite ready for that level of drama. Instead, I started writing what you might call a professional inventory. Every client relationship I developed personally. Every supplier who trusted me more than they trusted the Tanner Industries corporate structure. Every employee who'd come to me with problems because they knew I'd actually listen instead of referring them to HR for a consultation about proper channels. The list was longer than I'd expected. 15 years of showing up and doing the job had created a network that belonged to me, not to Jim's company. These weren't just business contacts. They were people who'd worked with Marcus Sullivan, not just some guy who happened to work for Tanner Industries. I also started a second list, internal processes and systems that I developed or improved over the years. Inventory management protocols that had saved the company hundreds of thousands in waste. Client communication systems that had reduced complaint calls by 60%. Staff scheduling innovations that had boosted productivity while keeping overtime costs under control. None of these improvements had Jim's name on them. None of them required the Tanner family seal of approval to work effectively. They were solutions I'd created, tested, and implemented because I'd identified problems and figured out ways to fix them. In other words, they were portable. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with another message from Lydia. I know you're still considering our conversation, but I wanted you to know that the timeline for this expansion is firming up. We're looking at a January launch, which means we need our leadership team in place by December. Just wanted to keep you in the loop. January launch. December deadline. That gave me about 8 weeks to make a decision that would completely reshape my professional life. 8 weeks to figure out whether I wanted to spend the next 15 years watching Jim and his sons run their company into the ground while I played the role of grateful family retainer, or whether I was ready to bet on myself for once. I typed back, "Thanks for the update. I appreciate you keeping me informed about the timeline. This is definitely something I'm taking seriously." Her response came back within minutes. "Good. Because seriously, Marcus, you're exactly what we need for this expansion. We're not just offering you a job. We're offering you a chance to build something. Build something. Not maintain something that someone else had built. Not protect something from changing market conditions. Build something new, from the ground up, with my own vision and strategy." I closed my laptop and headed back to bed, where Claire was already asleep, probably dreaming about whatever rich wives dream about. Designer handbags, maybe, or charity galas where she could wear expensive dresses and tell people about her husband's important job at Daddy's company. Tomorrow, I'd go back to playing my role. Loyal employee, grateful son-in-law, team player who knew his place in the family hierarchy. But tonight, for the first time in years, I was planning my own future instead of just accepting whatever Jim Tanner decided it should be. And it felt pretty damn good. Leading a double life is way more exhausting than Hollywood makes it look. Trust me on this one. For the past month, I'd been Marcus Sullivan, dutiful Tanner Industries employee by day, and Marcus Sullivan, secret weapon of Wilkes' global expansion by night. It was like being a corporate superhero, except instead of fighting crime, I was plotting the systematic dismantling of my father-in-law's business empire. Not exactly the origin story you see in comic books, but hey, we all have our calling. My official cover story was bulletproof, special projects. 2 words that could mean absolutely anything and nothing at the same time. When Jim asked what I was working on, I'd throw around terms like operational efficiency analysis and long-term strategic assessment. Corporate buzzword bingo at its finest. The beautiful thing about special projects is that they're supposed to be confidential, which meant I could disappear for hours at a time without anyone asking too many questions. What I was actually doing was spending quality time at Wilkes' global headquarters, a sleek glass tower downtown that made Tanner Industries offices look like a strip mall from the 1980s. Everything about the place screamed modern efficiency. Open floor plans that actually promoted collaboration instead of just looking trendy. Conference rooms with technology that had been invented sometime after the Bush administration, and a coffee machine that produced beverages you could drink without questioning your life choices. Lydia had introduced me to her brother Mason during my second visit, and let me tell you, the family resemblance was strong. Same sharp intelligence, same direct communication style, same complete lack of patience for corporate bullshit. Mason ran the financial side of Wilkes Global with the kind of precision that made Jim's shoot-from-the-hip management style look like what it was, outdated and ineffective. "Marcus," Mason had said during our first real strategy session, "we've been watching Tanner Industries for years, and honestly, we've been waiting for them to implode. The only thing that's kept them competitive is you. Me. Not the Tanner family legacy, not Jim's visionary leadership, not Brendan and Oliver's Harvard MBAs that their trust funds had basically purchased. Just me, doing the actual work while everyone else took credit for it. We think there's a window here," Lydia had added, spreading out market analysis reports across the conference table like she was planning a military campaign. Tanner Industries has been coasting on established relationships for years, but those relationships are starting to fray. Clients are getting frustrated with slow response times and outdated systems. Suppliers are tired of dealing with bureaucratic approval processes that take forever. She was right, and I had the inside information to prove it. Danny Morrison at Morrison Logistics had been dropping hints for months about looking for alternative suppliers. Peterson Manufacturing was getting pissy about delivery delays that Brendan kept promising to fix but never actually addressed. Even our longest-standing accounts were starting to ask pointed questions about whether Tanner Industries was still the right fit for their evolving needs. The thing is, Mason continued, we can't just waltz into their territory and expect to steal clients based on our good looks and winning personalities. We need someone who already has those relationships, someone clients trust and respect, someone who knows exactly where the weak spots are. Someone who knows exactly where the weak spots are. After 15 years of watching Jim run Tanner Industries like his personal kingdom, I could write a dissertation on weak spots. Hell, I'd been mentally cataloging them for years, filing away every inefficiency and every missed opportunity like evidence in a case I didn't know I was building. The beautiful thing about the Wilkes Global operation was how different it felt from every business meeting I'd ever attended at Tanner Industries. Instead of corporate theater and family politics, we talked about actual strategy, real numbers, realistic timelines, achievable goals that didn't require sacrificing quality or ethics to accomplish. It was like discovering that business meetings could actually be about business instead of ego management and succession planning. We're thinking aggressive but smart, Lydia explained during one particularly productive afternoon session. We don't want to just compete with Tanner Industries. We want to make them irrelevant. But we need to do it the right way, with better service, better technology, and better relationships. Better relationships. That's where I came in. See, while Jim had been busy playing corporate royalty for the past 15 years, I'd been doing something revolutionary. I'd been treating suppliers like actual human beings instead of disposable vendors. Crazy concept, I know. Like Tommy Rodriguez at Midwest Distribution, who'd been dealing with Tanner Industries for 8 years and had never once spoken directly to Jim or either of his sons. But Tommy and we'd grab lunch every couple months, and I knew about his kids' soccer team and his wife's art gallery and his plan to expand his operation into Indiana. When I mentioned that Wilkes Global was looking for reliable distribution partners in the region, Tommy's ears perked up like a golden retriever hearing a can opener. You know, Marcus, he'd said, leaning across the table at our usual diner, I've been thinking about diversifying our client base anyway. Tanner Industries is solid, but putting all our eggs in one basket makes me nervous. If Wilkes Global is looking for partners instead of just vendors, that sounds like something worth exploring. Partners instead of vendors. The difference between those two words could make or break a business relationship, and Jim had never figured that out. To him, suppliers were interchangeable resources that existed to serve Tanner Industries' needs and should be grateful for the privilege. To me, they were collaborators who could make or break our success if treated with basic respect and professionalism. Within 2 weeks, I had preliminary agreements with 3 major suppliers who were ready to jump ship the moment Wilkes Global officially entered the market. Not contracts. I wasn't stupid enough to put anything in writing while I was still technically employed by the competition, but conversations, handshake agreements, verbal commitments from people who trusted Marcus Sullivan more than they trusted the Tanner Industries corporate structure. The client side was even easier. Turns out that when you spend 15 years actually solving people's problems instead of just taking orders from the corner office, those people remember who was really taking care of them. Sarah Kim at Industrial Solutions Group had been dealing with delivery delays for months because Oliver kept promising improvements that never materialized. When I casually mentioned that I might be exploring new opportunities with a company that prioritized customer service, she practically begged for details. Marcus, you've been the only reason we've stuck with Tanner Industries this long, she'd said during what was supposed to be a routine quarterly review. If you were working somewhere else, somewhere that actually gave you the authority to fix problems instead of just apologizing for them, we'd follow you in a heartbeat. We'd follow you in a heartbeat. Music to my ears. 15 years of being treated like an interchangeable cog in Jim's machine, and it turned out that the clients saw me as the face of the company's competence. Who would have thought? The hardest part was maintaining my cover at home. Claire had started noticing my late nights, but her definition of curiosity was about as deep as a puddle after a light drizzle. When she asked where I'd been, I'd tell her the truth. Company business. She just assumed I meant her father's company, which technically I did, just not in the way she was thinking. You've been working so hard lately, she'd say, not looking up from whatever reality show was rotting her brain that particular evening. Dad must really be keeping you busy. Dad must really be keeping you busy. If only she knew that her precious daddy was about to find out exactly how busy I'd been, just not on his behalf. But Claire lived in a world where Daddy always knew best and Marcus always did what he was told. So the possibility that I might be planning my own future instead of just accepting whatever Jim decided it should be probably never crossed her mind. The funniest part was watching Jim's reaction to my sudden compliance. For weeks, I'd been the model employee, showing up early, staying late, attending every meeting I was invited to, laughing at his jokes, and nodding along with his strategic vision like it was handed down from Mount Sinai. He was so pleased with himself for putting me in my place that he actually started treating me better, like a pet that had finally learned to heel. "You see, Marcus," he'd said after one particularly productive board meeting where I'd presented quarterly numbers without a single complaint about budget cuts or resource limitations. "This is what happens when everyone knows their role and focuses on doing their best work. Maybe this salary adjustment was exactly what you needed to reach your full potential." My full potential, right? If Jim only knew that my full potential involved dismantling his business model piece by piece while he patted himself on the back for being such an effective leader. Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Lydia. "How are you feeling about January?" "Still on track." I typed back. "More than ready. Everything's falling into place." And it was. Suppliers lined up, clients ready to follow, employees who'd jump at the chance to work for a company that actually valued their contributions. Jim Tanner thought he'd broken me with his little power play, thought he'd reminded me who was really in charge. What he'd actually done was give me the motivation to show him what real leadership looked like. The Midwest Industrial Supply Conference happens every November in Chicago, and it's basically the Super Bowl for guys like us who get excited about logistics optimization and supply chain management. 3 days of seminars, networking events, and vendor showcases where everyone pretends to care about innovative solutions while really just trying to figure out who's sleeping with whom and which companies are about to go belly up. This year's theme was adapting to tomorrow's challenges, which was corporate speak for how do we make more money while spending less on everything. Jim had been looking forward to this conference for months, partly because he loved playing big shot in front of his industry peers, and partly because Tanner Industries was one of the keynote sponsors. Nothing strokes a CEO's ego quite like having your company logo plastered all over convention center banners while you deliver profound insights about market leadership to a captive audience of potential clients and competitors. I'd attended this same conference for the past 8 years, usually as Jim's wingman, the loyal lieutenant who'd smile and nod while he took credit for operational improvements I'd actually implemented. This year was going to be different, though. This year, I was attending as myself, Marcus Sullivan, soon-to-be Director of Strategic Expansion for Wilks Global, though Jim didn't know that part yet. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Lydia and Mason had secured a last-minute sponsor slot after another company pulled out due to budget constraints. Wilks Global would be announcing their Midwest expansion during the second day's keynote session, right after Jim finished his presentation about maintaining market leadership through traditional values. The timing wasn't accidental. Lydia had a flair for dramatic irony that I was really starting to appreciate. Wednesday morning, I sat in the audience watching Jim strut onto the stage like a peacock who'd just discovered mirrors. He was wearing his best power suit, the one that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. And he had that confident swagger that comes from years of being told you're a business genius by people who depend on your approval for their paychecks. "Ladies and gentlemen," Jim began, his voice booming through the conference center's sound system, "I want to talk to you today about what it really means to build a lasting business in this industry." Oh, this was going to be good. I settled back in my seat, pulled out my phone, and started recording. Not for any malicious purpose, you understand, just for posterity. Sometimes you want to remember the exact moment when someone's hubris reaches peak altitude right before it comes crashing down to earth. Jim launched into his usual spiel about family values, time-tested principles, and the importance of staying true to your roots while lesser companies chased after flash-in-the-pan trends. He talked about Tanner Industries like it was some kind of industrial supply monastery where ancient wisdom was preserved and passed down through generations of enlightened leadership. "We don't follow market fads," he declared, clicking through slides that showed the company's steady growth over the past decade. "We set the standard that others try to follow." While our competitors are busy reinventing themselves every few years, we focus on what really matters: consistent service, reliable partnerships, and the kind of personal relationships that can't be replicated by corporate algorithms. Consistent service, reliable partnerships, personal relationships. I had to give him credit. The man could spin a narrative like a political campaign manager. He was basically taking credit for everything I'd been doing for the past 15 years while making it sound like it was all part of his master plan. The audience was eating it up, too. Heads nodding, scattered applause at all the right moments. That kind of polite enthusiasm that conference attendees perfect after years of sitting through presentations that range from mildly interesting to actively painful. Jim was in his element, the successful CEO sharing hard-won wisdom with the next generation of industry leaders. In conclusion, he said, building toward what I knew would be his trademark closing line: success in this business isn't about chasing every new opportunity that comes along. It's about building something solid, something lasting, something that will still be here when all the flash and glamour fades away. Tanner Industries has been that kind of company for 30 years and will be that kind of company for 30 more. The applause was enthusiastic, the kind of response that makes conference organizers happy and keynote speakers feel like they've just delivered the Gettysburg Address. Jim soaked it up like a sponge, probably already planning how he'd describe this triumph to Claire over dinner. The whole industry was hanging on my every word, he'd say. Standing ovation when I finished. Then the conference moderator stepped up to the microphone. Thank you, Mr. Tanner, for those inspiring words about traditional business values. And now, we're pleased to welcome Lydia Wilkes, Chief Operating Officer of Wilkes Global, who'll be sharing some exciting news about expansion and innovation in our industry. I watched Jim's face change as Lydia walked onto the stage. The confident smile faltered just slightly. Not enough for most people to notice, but I've been studying his expressions for 15 years. He knew Wilkes Global was his biggest competition, but he'd assumed they'd stay safely contained on the West Coast where they belonged. The fact that Lydia was here, at his conference, giving a presentation to his audience, was like finding out your ex-girlfriend was dating your boss. Lydia looked incredible up there, all confidence and professional authority in a charcoal business suit that probably cost more than Jim's, but somehow managed to look effortless instead of showy. She had that California executive energy, polished but not pretentious, successful without being arrogant about it. Thank you all for being here today, she began, her voice carrying easily through the conference center. I want to talk to you about something that's been on my mind lately: the difference between maintaining the status quo and actually leading industry change. Maintaining the status quo. I almost laughed out loud. She was basically taking everything Jim had just said about traditional values and stability and turning it into an argument for why those things were actually weaknesses in a changing market. Brilliant. At Wilkes Global, we believe that respecting the past doesn't mean being afraid of the future, Lydia continued. Which is why I'm excited to announce our expansion into the Midwest market, bringing innovative solutions and fresh perspectives to a region that's been underserved by companies stuck in yesterday's business models. I could practically feel the tension in the room ratcheting up a notch. This wasn't just a presentation anymore. This was a declaration of war, delivered with PowerPoint slides and a smile that could cut glass. Jim was sitting 3 rows ahead of me, and I could see his shoulders getting rigid as Lydia laid out Wilkes Global's expansion plans with the kind of detail that suggested they'd been working on this for months. Now, successful expansion isn't just about having a good business plan, Lydia said, advancing to her next slide. It's about having the right leadership team, people who understand the market, who have established relationships, and who share our vision for what this industry could become with the right kind of innovative thinking. This was it. My cue. I felt my heart rate spike as Lydia's eyes found mine in the audience. Which is why I'm thrilled to introduce you to our new Director of Strategic Expansion, someone many of you already know and respect for his contributions to this industry over the past 15 years. The room went dead silent as she gestured toward me. Please join me in welcoming Marcus Sullivan to the Wilkes Global team. I stood up, and I swear to God, you could have heard a pin drop in that conference center. 500 industry professionals, including every major player in the regional market, watching as I walked down the aisle toward the stage like I was heading to my own wedding. Except this time, I was marrying a company that actually wanted me instead of just tolerating my presence. The walk to the stage felt like it took forever and no time at all. I could see faces in the audience, surprise, confusion, some knowing smiles from people who'd apparently seen this coming. Danny Morrison looked like someone had just told him Christmas was being moved to July. Sandra Chun from my old department was grinning like she'd just won the lottery. And Jim? Jim looked like someone had just told him his house was on fire and his insurance had expired yesterday. I shook Lydia's hand on stage, the cameras flashing like we were signing a peace treaty instead of launching what amounted to a business war. The handshake lasted just long enough for me to catch Jim's eye in the audience, just long enough to mouth two words that I'd been saving for exactly this moment. Perfect timing. His face went through about 6 different shades of red before settling on a color that I can only describe as a stroke victim purple. Brendan and Oliver were sitting next to him, looking like someone had just explained quantum physics using interpretive dance. The whole Tanner Industries delegation looked like they'd been hit by a truck that they never saw coming. But the best part wasn't Jim's expression or the gasps from the audience, or even the scattered applause from people who were probably just happy to witness some genuine conference drama. The best part was the feeling of finally being introduced as myself instead of as someone's son-in-law or employee or lucky bastard who'd married above his station. Marcus brings 15 years of operational excellence and industry relationships to our expansion team, Lydia announced to the crowd. His track record speaks for itself, and we're confident that his leadership will make our Midwest operations a success from day one. His leadership, his track record, his success. After 15 years of having my achievements attributed to Jim's guidance and my failures blamed on my limitations, hearing someone acknowledge my actual contributions felt like winning the professional lottery. I stepped up to the microphone, looked out at an audience that included every major player in the regional industrial supply market, and smiled. Thank you, Lydia. I'm excited to be part of a team that values innovation and results over tradition for tradition's sake. Wilks Global represents everything I believe this industry can become when we stop limiting ourselves to what we've always done and start focusing on what we could accomplish. The applause was genuine this time, and I could see people in the audience already pulling out their phones to text colleagues who weren't at the conference. By tomorrow morning, every supplier, client, and competitor in the Midwest would know that Marcus Sullivan had just declared independence from the Tanner Industries empire. As I walked off the stage, I caught sight of Jim again. He was still sitting in his seat, but his confident posture had completely collapsed. The man who'd spent the morning talking about market leadership and lasting success looked like someone who'd just realized his empire wasn't as solid as he'd thought. Perfect timing, indeed. Ever watched a controlled demolition? You know, where they place charges at just the right structural points and then hit the button to watch a whole building come down in about 15 seconds. That's basically what happened to Tanner Industries over the next 6 weeks, except instead of explosives, I'd used 15 years of inside knowledge and a carefully cultivated network of people who were tired of Jim's bullshit. The first domino fell exactly 3 days after the conference. Danny Morrison called me on my new Wilks Global number. Yeah, I had a company phone now, with my own voicemail message and everything, to confirm the contract terms we'd discussed. Morrison Logistics was officially jumping ship, taking their $2.3 million annual account with them. That might not sound like empire-toppling money, but in the industrial supply business, losing a major client is like getting a public vote of no confidence from people who actually understand your operation. Marcus, Danny said, and I could practically hear him grinning through the phone. I've got to tell you, working with Wilks Global feels like stepping into the 21st century. You guys actually answer emails within the same business day. Revolutionary concept. Within the same business day. At Tanner Industries, responding to client emails was apparently considered a luxury service that required committee approval and a cost-benefit analysis. But at Wilks Global, we had this crazy policy called basic professional courtesy that seemed to really impress people. The second domino was Peterson Manufacturing, and that one was particularly satisfying because Oliver had been promising them improved delivery schedules for literally 8 months. 8 months of, we're working on it, and these things take time, and you have to understand our operational constraints. When I called Peterson's purchasing director from my new office to introduce myself as their new Wilks Global contact, the guy practically wept with relief. Marcus, thank God, he said. We were about to start looking for alternative suppliers anyway. Oliver Tanner couldn't organize a two-car parade, let alone fix our delivery issues. Peterson Manufacturing, $1.8 million annually, gone. Two major clients down, and Jim was probably just starting to realize that his perfect timing salary cut had some unintended consequences. But the real bloodletting started when word spread through the supplier network. Tommy Rodriguez at Midwest Distribution was the first to officially switch sides. And once he started talking to his buddies about how much better Wilkes Global was to work with, it was like watching dominoes fall in slow motion. Suppliers who'd been grumbling about Tanner Industries' payment delays and bureaucratic approval processes suddenly had a viable alternative that treated them like actual business partners instead of disposable vendors. Within 2 weeks, Tanner Industries was dealing with what Jim's emergency board meeting minutes probably described as supply chain disruptions due to external market factors. In reality, their suppliers were either jumping ship entirely or suddenly developing mysterious delays in fulfilling Tanner Industries' orders. Funny how that works when you spend years treating people like crap and then they find somewhere better to take their business. The employee exodus was even more entertaining to watch from the outside. Sandra Chun was the first to go, and let me tell you, losing her was like losing the engine that kept the whole operation running. Sandra knew every aspect of Tanner Industries' distribution network, from warehouse layout optimization to delivery route efficiency. When she gave her 2 weeks' notice, Jim tried to counteroffer with a promotion and a raise, but it was too little, too late. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Tanner, Sandra had told him during what I heard was a supremely awkward exit interview. But I've accepted a position with a company that values innovation over tradition. Sometimes you have to take risks to grow professionally. Sandra joined Wilkes Global as our operations coordinator, bringing with her a complete understanding of how to improve on everything Tanner Industries was doing wrong. It was like having a detailed blueprint of your competitors' weaknesses delivered directly to your planning committee. She wasn't the only one. Mike Chun from accounting, no relation to Sandra, despite the name, followed her out the door after 12 years with the company. Then Jennifer Walsh from client services, who'd been dealing with Oliver's incompetent management style for way too long. By the end of November, Tanner Industries had lost 6 key employees, and the remaining staff was starting to look around like passengers on the Titanic who'd just heard the word iceberg. The best part was watching Brendan and Oliver try to manage the crisis. These two geniuses, who'd never had to actually solve a business problem that couldn't be fixed with daddy's money or connections, were suddenly responsible for keeping operations running while their most experienced people headed for the exits. It was like watching teenagers try to perform brain surgery with tools they'd never seen before. During one particularly disastrous week, Oliver managed to lose a major shipment because he'd forgotten to coordinate with the trucking company about holiday scheduling. The client, Industrial Solutions Group, Sarah Kim's company, called to complain, and Oliver's brilliant solution was to blame the trucking company for not anticipating our needs, despite the fact that nobody had bothered to tell them about the shipment in the first place. Sarah called me that same afternoon, officially requesting to transfer her account to Wilkes Global. Marcus, I can't do business with amateurs, she said, and she sounded genuinely frustrated. Oliver Tanner just tried to explain to me how the trucking industry works, despite the fact that I've been managing logistics for 15 years. The kid is clueless. Sarah's account, $3.2 million annually. Another major client down, and we weren't even trying that hard. They were basically driving customers away with their own incompetence. Meanwhile, the local business press was starting to notice the pattern. The Chicago Business Journal ran a story titled Regional Supply Chain Shakeup as Established Players Face New Competition. The article didn't mention names, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. Tanner Industries was bleeding clients and employees while Wilkes Global was aggressively expanding into their territory. By December, Jim had gone from confident industry leader to desperate damage control mode. He started calling emergency board meetings every other day, trying to figure out how to stop the hemorrhaging. The company's credit rating got downgraded after suppliers started demanding faster payment terms, which created a cash flow problem that made it even harder to compete on pricing. Claire finally noticed something was wrong when Jim started showing up at our house for family dinners, that were really strategy sessions disguised as pot roast and small talk. She'd sit there looking concerned while her father ranted about disloyal employees and predatory competitors who were trying to destroy everything he'd built. "I don't understand what's happening," she said to me one night after Jim had left following a particularly intense discussion about market pressures and competitive threats. "Dad's company has always been so stable. Why is everything falling apart now?" Everything falling apart now. Sweet, naive Claire, who'd lived her entire life believing that Daddy's success was some kind of natural law that couldn't be challenged by mere mortals with better ideas and superior execution. The possibility that her father's empire might have some structural weaknesses had apparently never crossed her mind. "Market conditions change," I told her, which was technically true. "Sometimes companies that don't adapt get left behind." "But you work there," she said, like she was just remembering that her husband was employed by the company that was currently circling the drain. "Shouldn't you be helping Dad figure out how to fix this?" "Shouldn't I be helping Dad fix this?" "Right." Because clearly, my job as the loyal son-in-law was to sacrifice my own professional future to prop up Jim's ego and incompetent management style. The fact that I might have my own career goals and ambitions was apparently beside the point. "Claire," I said, choosing my words carefully, "your father made his position very clear when he cut my salary and excluded me from strategic planning meetings. He doesn't want my help. He wants my compliance." She stared at me like I'd just suggested we sell the house and join the circus. "Marcus, you're being ridiculous. Dad values your input. He's just under a lot of pressure right now." "Values my input?" Sure he did, which was why I'd been systematically excluded from every important decision for the past 2 months, while watching his golden boys run the company into the ground with their Ivy League business degrees and complete lack of real-world experience. The phone rang that night at 11:30, which was never a good sign. It was Jim, and he sounded like a man who'd just realized his house was on fire and the fire department was busy washing their trucks. "Marcus," he said, skipping any pretense of pleasantries, "we need to talk. First thing tomorrow morning." "Sure thing, Jim. Everything okay?" There was a pause long enough for me to imagine him sitting in his home office, staring at quarterly reports that probably looked like a crime scene. "We'll discuss it tomorrow. Just be there early." I hung up and smiled in the darkness of my bedroom. Jim Tanner, the man who'd spent 30 years telling everyone else how to run their businesses, was about to ask for help from the charity case he'd been trying to crush just 2 months earlier. This was going to be fun. 6 months later, I was standing in the main floor of Wilks Global's brand new Midwest distribution center, watching a team twice the size of my old crew at Tanner Industries move inventory with the kind of efficiency that would have made Jim's head explode. State-of-the-art tracking systems, automated sorting equipment, and employees who actually gave a damn about their jobs because they worked for a company that treated them like valuable assets instead of disposable resources. The irony wasn't lost on me. This facility was everything I'd tried to convince Jim we needed at Tanner Industries: modern, efficient, strategically located for optimal distribution coverage. I'd pitched similar upgrades to him at least a dozen times over the years, only to be told that if it ain't broke, don't fix it, and we've always done fine with our current systems. Well, congratulations, Jim. Your refusal to invest in the future had just handed your biggest competitor the blueprint for destroying your market share. Lydia found me by the main sorting station, where our new automated system was processing orders at about 3 times the speed of Tanner Industries' manual operation. She was holding a leather portfolio that looked expensive enough to feed a small family for a month, which probably meant good news for yours truly. "Marcus," she said, and her smile had that satisfied quality that comes from watching a plan come together perfectly. "I've got something for you." She handed me the portfolio, and inside was a contract extension that made my original Wilks Global offer look like pocket change. Director of Strategic Expansion was apparently just the entry-level position. The new title was Vice President of Regional Operations, with an equity stake that would make me a legitimate millionaire if the company's expansion continued at its current pace. "You've more than proven yourself," Lydia continued as I tried not to let my jaw hit the floor while reading the compensation details. "The Midwest expansion has exceeded every projection we made. We're 3 months ahead of schedule and already profitable. That doesn't happen by accident." "No, it doesn't happen by accident. It happens when you hire people who actually know what they're doing instead of people who happen to share your DNA. Novel concept, apparently. The numbers were impressive enough to make even my accountant do a happy dance. We'd captured 60% of Tanner Industries' major accounts within 4 months, hired away their best employees, and established supply relationships that were going to be nearly impossible for them to compete with. When you treat suppliers like partners instead of peasants, funny thing, they remember that when it's time to choose sides. There's more, Lydia said, because apparently my day needed to get even better. Mason and I have been talking, and we want to offer you something that goes beyond this regional expansion. She pulled out another folder, and this one contained organizational charts for Wilks Global's entire operation. We're planning a national expansion over the next 2 years. Full coverage, coast to coast, taking on the big players in every major market. We want you to head up the whole operation. Head up the whole operation. As in, be the guy making strategic decisions for a company that was about to become a major player in the national industrial supply market. As in, stop being someone's employee and start being someone's business partner with real authority and real rewards. I looked around the distribution center again, watching people who used to work for Tanner Industries doing their jobs with the kind of enthusiasm that comes from being treated with respect and given room to excel. Sandra Chun was training new hires on inventory management. Mike from accounting was implementing cost-tracking systems that actually made sense. Jennifer Walsh was building client relationships that would last for years instead of just hoping clients wouldn't notice how screwed up everything was behind the scenes. What do you think? Lydia asked. Ready to take on the big leagues? What did I think? I thought about Jim Tanner sitting in his oversized office, probably staring at quarterly reports that looked like a medical examiner's findings. I thought about Brendan and Oliver trying to explain to their board of directors how they'd managed to lose half their client base to a competitor they'd never taken seriously. I thought about Claire, who'd filed for divorce 3 months ago when she'd finally realized that being married to me wasn't quite as advantageous as it used to be. The divorce had been predictably ugly, with Claire's lawyers trying to argue that my Wilks Global position was somehow community property that she deserved to benefit from. Apparently, even after our marriage imploded, she still thought she was entitled to profit from my professional success. The judge had been less impressed with that argument than she'd hoped. You know what, Lydia? I said, closing the contract folder and extending my hand for a handshake that would officially make me a vice president at one of the fastest-growing companies in the industry. I think I'm ready. The local business press had been having a field day with the whole situation. The rise and fall of Tanner Industries, a case study in family business succession, had been the headline in last month's Regional Commerce Review. The article quoted industry insiders who blamed the company's decline on outdated management practices and failure to retain key talent. Key talent. That would be me, folks. The charity case, who apparently wasn't executive material, had just been promoted to run national operations for a company that was kicking his former employer's ass up and down the supply chain. The best part wasn't even the professional vindication or the money or the equity stake that was going to make me genuinely wealthy instead of just well compensated. The best part was walking into industry conferences now and having people treat me like Marcus Sullivan, successful executive, instead of Marcus Sullivan, Jim Tanner's son-in-law who'd gotten lucky. Jim tried calling me exactly once, about 2 months after the conference disaster. I let it go to voicemail, and his message was a masterpiece of desperate corporate speak. Marcus, I think there may have been some misunderstandings about your role at Tanner Industries. Perhaps we could sit down and discuss how to move forward in a way that benefits everyone involved. Misunderstandings about my role. Benefits everyone involved. The man who'd publicly declared that I wasn't executive material was suddenly interested in revisiting our professional relationship now that his company was hemorrhaging money and reputation. I deleted the message without calling him back. Some bridges are meant to be burned, and watching them burn from a safe distance while sipping expensive whiskey is one of life's genuine pleasures. Trade journals started calling me the man who dethroned Tanner, which was probably giving me more credit than I deserved, but sounded pretty badass on business cards. The truth was simpler. I'd just stopped accepting a situation that was beneath my worth and started working for people who recognized what I brought to the table. 6 months ago, I was the grateful son-in-law who should have been thankful for whatever scraps Jim decided to throw my way. Now I was the vice president of a company that was rewriting the rules for how business gets done in this industry, with an equity stake that would set me up for life and the professional respect that I'd been earning for 15 years but never receiving. Standing in that distribution center, watching efficiency and professionalism in action, I couldn't help but think about Jim's words from our last conversation. Perfect timing. He'd been right about that, just not in the way he'd intended. Jim Tanner had wanted to cut my salary in half and remind me of my place in his family hierarchy. Instead, he'd cut himself out of his own empire and handed me the keys to build something better. Me? I wasn't just surviving the corporate politics and family drama anymore. I was writing the next chapter of my own success story, and it felt pretty damn good to be holding the pen for once. My wife got G at her bachelorette party thought I'd never find out, until I quietly vanished before the wedding, and what happened next left everyone speechless. My name is Marcus Hale, and let me tell you something about the American dream. It's a real son of a bitch when it decides to sucker punch you in the gut. 2 years ago, I was living what every basic dude with a business degree thinks is the perfect life. Hell, I was practically the poster child for having your shit together in your late 20s. I had a software company that was actually making money, not just burning through venture capital like most startups run by guys who think wearing hoodies to board meetings makes them Steve Jobs. No, my company was genuinely thriving, pulling in 7 figures annually, and I wasn't even 30 yet. My parents, God bless their suburban hearts, couldn't shut up about their successful son at every neighborhood barbecue and Christmas party. You know how it goes. Your mom corners some poor soul at the grocery store and launches into this unsolicited biography about how little Marcus built his own company from scratch. Dad would practically burst with pride whenever someone asked what I did for a living. Software solutions, he'd say with this smug grin, like he had any clue what that actually meant beyond computers make money somehow. Then there was my brother Daniel, my supposed ride or die, the guy who knew all my secrets and had my back through every stupid decision I'd made since we were kids stealing Dad's beer from the garage fridge. We had that bond, you know? The kind where you can call at 3 in the morning and they'll show up with pizza and terrible advice, no questions asked. At least, that's what I thought we had. But the real crown jewel of my supposedly perfect existence was Christina Ward. Jesus Christ, where do I even start with Christina? This woman wasn't just beautiful. Though let's be real, she was a certified knockout with those green eyes and this smile that could probably end wars if deployed strategically. She was the whole package. Smart enough to hold her own in any conversation, ambitious enough to have her own career goals, and funny in that dry, sarcastic way that made me think we were perfectly matched intellectually. For 3 years, we built what I genuinely believed was a real partnership. Not one of those shallow relationships where you're just splitting rent and pretending to like each other's friends. No, this felt like the real deal. We bought a condo together, a nice place with granite countertops and one of those kitchen islands that makes you feel like you're living in a home improvement commercial. We adopted this golden retriever named Charlie who was basically our practice kid, complete with his own Instagram account, because that's apparently what responsible pet parents do now. Christina and I would spend hours planning our future like we were mapping out a business strategy. Dream vacations to places like Japan and Iceland, conversations about what we'd name our kids, debates about whether we wanted to live in the suburbs or stay urban. She had this way of making even the mundane stuff feel significant. Grocery shopping became this thing where we'd argue about organic versus conventional produce, and somehow she made me care about thread count when we bought sheets. What really got me was how seamlessly she fit into my world and how naturally I slipped into hers. Her parents treated me like I was already family. Her dad would corner me during dinner parties to talk business, and her mom would text me directly about family events. Meanwhile, my own mother had basically adopted Christina as the daughter she never had. They'd go shopping together, share recipes, and have these long phone conversations about God knows what. It was like we'd created this perfect little ecosystem where everyone loved everyone, and the future was just this bright, shiny thing waiting for us to claim it. I thought I was the luckiest bastard alive. Here I was with a successful business, a woman who challenged me intellectually and supported me emotionally, and a family situation that didn't involve therapy or restraining orders. I mean, what more could a guy ask for? We had our shit figured out while most of our friends were still trying to decide if they wanted to be adults or keep pretending that 30 was the new 20. So naturally, when I finally worked up the courage to propose, I went all out. Not because I felt pressured or because it was time, but because I genuinely couldn't imagine my life without this woman in it. I planned this elaborate sunrise hike to her favorite spot in the mountains, complete with a photographer hidden in the bushes like some kind of romantic paparazzi. I had the ring custom designed, spent weeks agonizing over every detail because I wanted it to be perfect for her. When I got down on one knee that morning, with the sun painting the sky all these ridiculous shades of pink and orange, I was absolutely certain we were solid. Rock solid. The kind of solid that survives job losses and family drama and all the other garbage life throws at you. She said yes, obviously, and cried those happy tears that make you feel like you're in a movie. We called our parents right there on the mountain, and everyone was thrilled and started making plans and talking about venues. I thought I'd won the lottery, the relationship lottery that most people spend their entire lives trying to hit. I had found my person, the one who made all the cheesy romantic comedy bullshit actually make sense. The one who made me want to be better without making me feel like I wasn't good enough as I was. The one who laughed at my terrible jokes and called me out on my worst habits and somehow made even mundane Tuesday nights feel like something worth celebrating. But here's the thing about life. It's got this absolutely twisted sense of humor and perfect timing when it comes to destroying everything you think you understand about yourself and the people you love. Just when you're feeling most confident, most secure, most certain that you've got it all figured out, life decides to test exactly how unbreakable your unbreakable really is. And trust me, what I thought was unbreakable turned out to be made of something a lot more fragile than I ever imagined. But I'm getting ahead of myself. At that moment, on that mountain, with that ring on her finger and those tears in her eyes, I genuinely believed we had beaten the odds. I thought we were different, special, destined for one of those love stories that makes other people believe in forever. Turns out I was right about one thing. We definitely were going to be a story people would remember, just not the kind I had in mind. So let me paint you a picture of how quickly your entire world can go from Pinterest perfect to Jerry Springer nightmare, courtesy of one Becca Lewis. Christina's maid of honor and apparently the devil's own event coordinator. If you've ever wondered what pure evil looks like wrapped in a size 2 dress with a sociology degree, let me introduce you to this absolute gem of a human being. Becca had been Christina's best friend since college. One of those ride-or-die friendships that I always respected, even though something about Becca made my skin crawl. She was the kind of person who always had to one-up everyone's stories, who posted inspirational quotes on Instagram while talking shit about people behind their backs, and who somehow managed to make every conversation about herself. But Christina loved her, so I played nice and pretended not to notice when Becca would make little passive-aggressive comments about men in general and me specifically. When it came time to plan Christina's bachelorette party, Becca took charge like she was organizing a military operation. And honestly, I was relieved. Planning parties isn't exactly my forte. I'm more of a order pizza and watch Netflix kind of guy when it comes to celebrations. So when Becca announced she was taking the girls to Miami for a long weekend, I thought it sounded perfect. Sun, drinks, dancing, the whole stereotypical bachelorette experience that would give Christina great stories to tell our future kids. The guest list was exactly what you'd expect. Christina's younger sister Olivia, who was still in that phase where she thought being 23 made her wise about the world, plus 10 other friends from college and work, all of them decent people as far as I knew. Sure, a couple of them were still stuck in that post-college party phase where every weekend was an excuse to blackout drink and make questionable decisions, but nothing too crazy. Or so I thought. The first night went exactly as advertised. I got the obligatory group photos via text. You know the ones, where everyone's holding colorful drinks and making those exaggerated, we're having so much fun faces for social media. Christina looked gorgeous, obviously, wearing this little black dress that made me simultaneously proud she was mine and slightly jealous of every guy who got to look at her. They hit up some trendy rooftop bar, took a million selfies, and probably spent more on bottle service than I spend on groceries in a month. Classic Miami bachelorette bullshit, exactly what I expected. But then came night 2. And this is where Becca's true genius for destruction really shined. See, while the first night was all about public consumption, the Instagram stories, the Facebook check-ins, the carefully curated photos designed to make everyone back home jealous, night 2 was supposed to be private. Very private. The kind of private that requires signing NDAs and turning off location services. Becca had arranged for the party to move from the clubs to this rental house in South Beach. Nothing too suspicious about that. Girls' trips often end up in some ridiculous Airbnb where everyone can spread out and continue the party without worrying about hotel noise complaints or judgmental tourists. What she didn't advertise in the group chat was that she'd also arranged for some entertainment. For male dancers, to be exact. But let's call them what they actually were. Male strippers who specialized in private parties for groups of wealthy women looking to live out their 50 Shades fantasies. These weren't your typical Magic Mike wannabes doing cheesy routines at some dive bar. No, these were full-service performers who came with their own music, their own props, and absolutely zero boundaries when it came to audience participation. Now, here's where the story gets really interesting. While I was back home, probably watching some mindless action movie and missing Christina like the devoted fiancé I was, she was discovering exactly what kind of woman she became when nobody was watching. Or at least, when she thought nobody was watching. The drinks were flowing, top shelf everything, because Becca never did anything halfway. Someone had brought party favors of the pharmaceutical variety, because apparently mimosas and champagne weren't enough to lower inhibitions for what Becca had planned. And slowly but surely, my sweet, conservative, let's wait until marriage for the really kinky stuff, fiancé started transforming into someone I wouldn't have recognized if I'd been standing right there. The cheering started innocently enough. A little whooping and hollering as the guys did their choreographed routines, the kind of noise you'd expect from any group of drunk women watching attractive men take their clothes off. But as the night progressed and the alcohol kicked in and whatever else they were taking started working its magic, things escalated quickly. What began as innocent fun, the kind of thing that happens at bachelor and bachelorette parties across America every weekend, turned into something that would make a porn director blush. The dancing became touching. The touching became participating. And my precious Christina, the woman who blushed when we talked about trying new positions, became the star of her own private show while her friends cheered her on like she was competing for Olympic gold in infidelity. The worst part? They filmed everything. Every single degrading moment. Every cheer, every laugh, every second of my fiancé doing things with strangers that she'd never even suggested we try together. Becca, ever the documentarian, made sure to capture it all from multiple angles. For posterity, she probably told herself. For blackmail material, more likely. But here's the real kicker. It wasn't just Christina. This became a group activity, a sisterhood bonding experience where inhibitions were checked at the door and marriage vows were apparently just suggestions. Olivia, sweet little Olivia who still called me future brother-in-law and asked my advice about boys, turned out to be just as enthusiastic as her older sister. Half the bridesmaids joined in like it was some kind of twisted team-building exercise. And through it all, there was Becca, orchestrating the whole thing like a conductor leading a symphony of betrayal. She was the one encouraging, the one filming, the one making sure everyone got their turn in the spotlight. She turned my fiancé's bachelorette party into something that would have made Hugh Hefner proud. The truly beautiful irony? While they were all getting their kicks in Miami, thinking their secrets were safe in that rented house, technology had other plans. Those videos, those precious memories of their girls' weekend, were automatically backing up to the cloud. Our shared cloud storage account, specifically, the same one we used for wedding planning and vacation photos and all those sweet, innocent moments from our 3 years together. So while Christina was living it up in South Beach, discovering her inner porn star with 4 random dudes and her giggling friends, every single second was being preserved for posterity in high definition, just waiting for me to discover it. And discover it I did. You know that moment in horror movies when the protagonist realizes the monster has been living in their house the whole time? That split second when everything they thought they knew about their safe little world gets turned upside down and they're standing there like an idiot wondering how they missed all the obvious signs? Yeah, well, that was me at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, sitting in my home office in my boxers, staring at my laptop screen like it had just grown fangs, and started speaking Latin. Christina had gotten back from Miami 3 days earlier, all sun-kissed and glowing, full of stories about overpriced drinks and how Olivia had gotten so drunk she tried to order room service from a lamp. Cute stories. Innocent stories. The kind of harmless bachelorette party tales that make for good dinner conversation with the in-laws. She'd show me photos on her phone, the usual suspects posing at various Miami hotspots, everyone looking appropriately wild but not too wild, like they were auditioning for a reality show about responsible adult women having clean fun. What she didn't tell me about were the other photos. The ones that were quietly uploading themselves to our shared cloud storage while she regaled me with edited highlights of her weekend. See, here's the thing about modern technology. It's designed to make our lives easier by automatically backing up every precious memory. Family vacations, birthday parties, random Tuesday afternoon selfies, and apparently, your fiancé's weekend-long descent into behavior that would make a porn star proud. I'd been working late, trying to finish up some code for a client presentation, when I decided to grab some photos from our Miami trip last year for a slideshow. Just clicking through our shared albums, looking for that perfect sunset shot, when suddenly I'm staring at a thumbnail that definitely wasn't from our romantic getaway. It was Christina, all right. But this wasn't the Christina who worried about whether her dress was too short for church or who made me turn around when she was getting changed. At first, I thought it was some kind of mistake. Maybe someone else's photos had gotten mixed up with ours through some cloud storage glitch. Technology screws up all the time, right? But then I saw the timestamp. Last weekend, Miami. And then I saw Becca in the background, holding up her phone like she was filming a documentary about the complete destruction of my faith in humanity. I sat there for probably 10 minutes, just staring at that first thumbnail, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. It's funny how your mind tries to protect you from devastating information by simply refusing to accept it. Like, maybe if I just didn't click on that video, it wouldn't be real. Maybe if I pretended I never saw it, I could go back to my nice little fantasy where my fiancée was this sweet, conservative girl who thought missionary position was adventurous. But curiosity and masochism make terrible bedfellows, and eventually I clicked. And then I clicked on another one. And another. Each video was like a fresh punch to the gut, a new revelation about exactly how wrong I'd been about the woman I thought I knew better than anyone else in the world. There she was, my sweet Christina, doing things with complete strangers that we'd never even discussed in our most intimate moments together. The worst part wasn't even what she was doing, though trust me, that was pretty fucking devastating. The worst part was how much she was enjoying it. The laughter, the enthusiasm, the complete abandonment of every boundary we'd ever established in our relationship. She wasn't drunk and making a mistake. She wasn't being pressured or coerced. She was having the time of her life, living out some fantasy I apparently never even knew existed. And there were her friends, cheering her on like she was winning Olympic gold in betrayal. Becca, naturally, was the ringleader, encouraging every degrading moment while making sure to capture it all from the best angles. Even sweet little Olivia was there, laughing and participating like this was just another Tuesday night for the Ward family women. I must have watched those videos for 3 hours, my brain cycling through every emotion a human being can experience in rapid succession. Anger, heartbreak, disbelief, rage, disgust, and finally, this weird, cold calculation that I didn't even recognize as coming from me. It was like watching my personality split in real time. The emotional Marcus getting shoved into a closet while this new, analytical version took control. The next few days were absolutely surreal. Christina went about her normal routine like nothing had happened, chatting about wedding details and asking my opinion on centerpieces while I sat there knowing exactly what those perfectly manicured hands had been doing just days before. She'd curl up next to me on the couch to watch TV, and I'd have to fight the urge to ask her if the guys in Miami had been better than me. She'd kiss me good morning, and I'd wonder if she was thinking about kissing them. But here's the thing that surprised me most about myself. I didn't explode. I didn't scream or throw things or demand explanations. Instead, I became this master actor, playing the role of devoted fiancé while my brain worked overtime planning my exit strategy. We went to dinner with her parents, and I smiled and nodded while her mother talked about how excited she was for the wedding. We met with the caterer, and I pretended to care about the difference between salmon and chicken while mentally calculating how much money I was about to lose on deposits. The performance of my life culminated in what should have been a romantic evening at home. We'd ordered Thai food and opened a bottle of wine, sitting at our kitchen island discussing final wedding details like we were planning a military operation instead of what was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. Christina was animated, excited, talking about how perfect everything was going to be while I sat there thinking about how perfect her performance had been in Miami. That's when I decided to have a little fun with the situation. I raised my wine glass and looked directly into her eyes, those beautiful green eyes that I'd thought held nothing but love and honesty, and proposed a toast. To the truth, I said, watching her face carefully, and how it always finds its way to the surface, no matter how deep people try to bury it. She laughed, but it was nervous, uncertain. She clinked her glass against mine and took a sip, but I could see the wheels turning behind those eyes. Something in my tone, maybe, or the way I was looking at her. For just a second, I saw a flicker of fear cross her face, like she was wondering if I might know something I wasn't supposed to know. But then the moment passed, and she was back to chattering about flowers and seating arrangements, and I was back to playing my part. The perfect fiancé, blissfully unaware that his entire life was built on a foundation of lies and shared cloud storage. Little did she know, the truth had already found its way to the surface, and I was about to make sure everyone else could see it too. There's something absolutely liberating about burning your entire life to the ground when you know you're doing it for all the right reasons. Most people spend their whole lives trapped by inertia, staying in shitty situations because change is scary and the unknown feels worse than the familiar misery. But when you've got nothing left to lose because everything you thought you had was just an elaborate lie anyway, well, that's when you discover what real freedom feels like. I woke up that Thursday morning at 5:30 a.m., like I had every day for the past 3 years. Christina was still dead asleep next to me, sprawled across her side of the bed in that oversized NYU t-shirt she'd been wearing since college. Her hair fanned out across the pillow like some kind of Renaissance painting. For a split second, looking at her peaceful face in the early morning light, I almost forgot what I knew. Almost let myself slip back into the fantasy that this was still my life, that she was still my person, that we were still building something real together. But then I remembered those videos, and that momentary weakness passed like a bad hangover. I slipped out of bed without making a sound, a skill I'd perfected over 3 years of early morning conference calls with clients on the West Coast, and headed to the shower. As the hot water hit my face, I ran through my mental checklist one more time. Today was the day I became a ghost. I'd spent the last week planning this exit like it was the most important business deal of my life, which in a way, it was. The business deal where I traded my old, pathetic, deceived life for something clean and new. I'd already transferred the important files from my office to a secure server, quietly closed out projects with existing clients, and set up automatic payments for all the bills that would need handling in the coming weeks. I wasn't just disappearing. I was evaporating without leaving a trace of financial chaos behind me. By 6:15, I was dressed and moving through our condo like a man on a mission. I grabbed my go bag from the back of our closet, a simple duffel with enough clothes and essentials to last me a few weeks while I figured out my next move. Everything else, all the accumulated stuff of our shared life, could stay right where it was. I didn't want any of it anymore. Every piece of furniture, every photo, every little decorative item we'd picked out together had been contaminated by the truth of who she really was. Christina never stirred as I wrote out the checks for the wedding vendors. Every single one, paid in full with little notes explaining that the wedding was canceled and they should keep their deposits as compensation for the late notice. The florist, the caterer, the band, the photographer, all of them got their money and their freedom. I wasn't going to let innocent small business owners suffer because my fiancé turned out to be a fraud. The note I left on the kitchen counter was a masterpiece of brevity. The wedding is off. Take care of yourself. 22 words to end a 3-year relationship and a lifetime of shared plans. I probably spent more words ordering coffee at Starbucks, but sometimes the most devastating messages are the shortest ones. No explanation, no accusations, no dramatic flourishes. Just facts, delivered with the emotional warmth of a parking ticket. I locked the door behind me at 7:45 a.m. and dropped my keys in the mailbox. By 8:30, I was at my office, boxing up the last of my personal items while my assistant Rebecca, yes, another Rebecca, because apparently that name was cursed in my life, watched me with growing concern. She kept asking if everything was okay, if there was anything she could do to help, if I was taking a vacation. Sweet kid, probably about Christina's age, still young enough to believe that successful people don't just implode their entire lives on a random Thursday morning. I'm taking an extended break, I told her, which was technically true. An extended break from trusting people, from believing in fairy tale relationships, from being the kind of naive idiot who thinks shared cloud storage is just for vacation photos. Forward any urgent calls to my cell, but otherwise, consider this place closed indefinitely. The moving company arrived at our condo at exactly 10 a.m., just like I'd scheduled. Professional, efficient, and completely indifferent to the emotional weight of what they were packing. My clothes, my books, my computer equipment, my coffee maker. Everything that was purely mine got loaded into a truck and hauled away to a storage unit across town. I watched 3 years of domestic bliss get reduced to boxes and labels, and felt absolutely nothing. By noon, I was standing in the Verizon store, canceling my phone service and tossing my iPhone into the trash like it was contaminated with the plague. The teenage employee looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but he processed the cancellation anyway. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Every digital footprint of Marcus Hale, successful entrepreneur and devoted fiancé, got deleted with the same clinical efficiency I used to debug code. The bank was my next stop, where I closed our joint checking account and moved everything into a new account at a different institution. Clean break. No shared financial entanglements. No way for her to track my movements through credit card statements or online banking. I even changed my direct deposit information for the business accounts, routing everything through a completely separate financial ecosystem. Daniel was the only person who got a heads up, and even that was minimal. A single text from a burner phone, wedding's off. Christina knows why. I'm fine. Don't contact me for a while. My brother, bless his heart, immediately started calling the burner number, but I turned the phone off and threw it in a different trash can. Even Daniel, my supposed ally, was going to have to wait for explanations. The hotel I checked into was deliberately generic. One of those extended stay places that cater to business travelers and people in the middle of life transitions. Clean, anonymous, and staffed by people who were paid to mind their own business. I registered under a false name, paid cash for a week, and settled into my temporary exile like a man entering witness protection. Christina would wake up tomorrow morning to discover that her fiancé had vanished into thin air. No note explaining why, no angry confrontation, no chance to offer explanations or apologies or promises to change. Just absence, sudden and complete, like I'd been raptured while she slept. Her phone calls would go straight to a disconnected number. Her texts would disappear into the digital void. Her emails would bounce back like I'd never existed. For the first time in 3 years, Christina Ward would have to face the consequences of her actions without me there to cushion the blow or make excuses for her behavior. And somewhere in that anonymous hotel room, I smiled for the first time in a week. Saturday morning, June 15th. What should have been our wedding day? What should have been the culmination of 3 years of planning? The day Christina walked down the aisle in that ridiculously expensive dress she'd spent months obsessing over. The day I promised to love and cherish her until death do us part. Instead, I was sitting in a coffee shop in downtown Seattle, nursing my third espresso and putting the finishing touches on what would become the most visited website in Christina Ward's personal history. You know what's beautiful about being a software developer? You learn to think in systems, in cause and effect, in elegant solutions to complex problems. And Christina's little Miami adventure had presented me with a fascinating problem. How do you ensure that actions have consequences when the person committing those actions thinks they've gotten away with murder? How do you make sure the truth gets the audience it deserves? The answer, as it turns out, is surprisingly simple. You build a website. Not just any website, mind you. This wasn't some amateur-hour revenge blog thrown together in a fit of rage. No, this was a professional-grade digital monument to accountability, designed with the same attention to detail I'd put into million-dollar client projects. Clean layout, optimized for mobile viewing, fast loading times, and search engine optimization that would make a marketing guru weep with envy. The domain name was perfect in its simplicity, ChristinaWardTruth.com. Her full name, right there in the URL, so anyone who Googled her would find exactly what they were looking for. I registered it through a privacy service, paid for 3 years upfront, and set up hosting on a server farm that could handle serious traffic. Because something told me this site was going to be popular. The homepage was a masterpiece of understated design. Just her name at the top in elegant typography, followed by a simple tagline. The truth about a Miami weekend. Below that, a brief explanation of what visitors were about to see, written in the kind of clinical, professional language you'd find in a corporate press release. No emotional outbursts, no angry rants, just facts presented with the cold efficiency of a coroner's report. The following documentation was automatically uploaded to shared cloud storage during a bachelorette party weekend in Miami, Florida. The materials presented here are unedited and speak for themselves. Viewer discretion is advised. That was it. No accusations, no commentary, no editorial spin. Just a statement of fact that put the responsibility for interpretation squarely on the viewer. Because sometimes the most devastating truth is the one that speaks for itself. The videos were organized chronologically, starting with the innocent group shots from the first night and gradually escalating to the main event. Each file was labeled with just a timestamp and duration, no sensational titles or clickbait descriptions. The content was shocking enough on its own without needing any help from creative marketing. But here's where my professional experience really came in handy. I didn't just dump the raw footage and call it a day. No, I optimized everything. Compressed the files for faster streaming, created multiple resolution options for different connection speeds, and even added closed captions for accessibility. Because if you're going to destroy someone's reputation, you might as well do it with production values. The technical specifications were flawless. SSL encryption for security, CDN distribution for global access, and robust analytics tracking, so I could watch in real time as Christina's dirty laundry got aired to the entire internet. I even set up automated social media sharing buttons, because why should I do all the work of spreading the news when her friends and family could help? The beauty of launching on our supposed wedding day wasn't lost on me. While our guests would have been arriving at the venue, expecting to witness the beautiful union of Marcus and Christina, they instead received a text message with a link to the website and a simple note. This is why there's no wedding today. Short, sweet, and guaranteed to get clicks. I watched the analytics dashboard like a day trader monitoring stock prices. The first visitor hit the site at 10:47 a.m., probably Christina herself, frantically typing her own name into Google after someone forwarded her the link. The visitor count climbed steadily as word spread through our social circles like a digital wildfire. 10 visitors, then 50, then hundreds as people shared the link with friends and family. The geographic distribution was fascinating. Seattle, where we lived. Miami, where her sins were committed. Los Angeles, where her parents had retired. College towns across the country as her sorority sisters got wind of the scandal. The website was going viral in all the worst ways for Christina and all the best ways for truth and justice. By noon, I had confirmation that the message had reached its intended targets. My phone, the new burner I'd picked up just for this occasion, started buzzing with calls from blocked numbers. Christina, probably, trying desperately to reach me from whatever borrowed phone she could get her hands on. Her parents, most likely, calling to demand explanations that would never come. Friends and family members who suddenly found themselves with front-row seats to the destruction of everything they thought they knew about sweet, innocent Christina Ward. The most satisfying part was watching the download statistics. People weren't just viewing the content, they were saving it, sharing it, ensuring that even if I took the site down tomorrow, Christina's Miami memories would live forever in screenshot and screen recording form. The internet never forgets, and I'd just given it something very memorable to hold on to. Around 2 p.m., I got a notification that someone had tried to report the website for hosting revenge porn. Cute attempt, but legally meaningless since all the content had been voluntarily created and automatically shared to a joint account. Christina had essentially published this material herself. I was just providing better distribution and a more user-friendly interface. The comments section I'd included was already filling up with reactions from people who recognized the participants. Former colleagues expressing their shock, family friends asking if this was really the same Christina they'd known since childhood, and college acquaintances sharing their own stories about Becca's previous party planning adventures. The internet had become both judge and jury, and the verdict was unanimous: guilty as charged. As the sun set on what should have been our wedding night, I closed my laptop and allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction. Christina Ward had wanted to have her cake and eat it too, living a double life where she could be the perfect fiancé to my face and a completely different person behind my back. Well, now everyone could see exactly what kind of cake she'd been eating in Miami, and the internet was going to make sure she choked on every bite. You know what they say about throwing a stone into a pond? The ripples keep spreading long after the stone has sunk to the bottom. Well, ChristinaWardTruth.com was more like dropping a nuclear bomb into a kiddie pool, and the shockwaves were absolutely magnificent to watch unfold from my front row seat in digital purgatory. The first domino fell on Monday morning, exactly 72 hours after I hit publish. Christina's boss at Morrison Marketing called her into his office for what I can only imagine was the most uncomfortable conversation of her professional life. See, Christina worked for one of those boutique agencies that specialized in family-friendly brands. Think wholesome breakfast cereals, children's toys, and organic baby food companies. Their entire business model was built on trust, reputation, and the kind of squeaky clean image that doesn't mesh well with employees starring in amateur porn productions. According to my sources, and yes, I had sources, because Seattle's marketing community is smaller than you'd think and gossip travels faster than a Tesla in ludicrous mode, the conversation went something like this. Christina, we've become aware of some materials circulating online that feature you prominently. While we don't typically concern ourselves with our employees' private lives, several of our clients have expressed concern about the association with their brands. Translation: you're fired. And we're going to pretend this is about protecting our clients instead of admitting we're embarrassed to have hired someone who thinks gangbangs make for good bachelorette party entertainment. She was escorted out of the building that same afternoon, her corporate access revoked, her company laptop confiscated, and her dreams of becoming the next big thing in marketing flushed down the toilet along with her reputation. 3 years of climbing the corporate ladder, building client relationships, and positioning herself as a rising star in the industry, all undone by one weekend of poor decision-making and Becca's documentary filmmaking skills. But Christina's professional suicide was just the opening act. The real show started when her parents got wind of what their precious daughter had been up to in Miami. Robert and Helen Ward, pillars of their suburban community and devout members of St. Mary's Episcopal Church, suddenly found themselves fielding phone calls from concerned friends who'd stumbled across their daughter's internet debut. Picture this. You're 68 years old, you've spent your entire life building a respectable reputation in your community, and you're known as the couple who raised that lovely, successful daughter who was marrying that nice young man with the software company. Then suddenly you're getting phone calls from your bridge club asking if you've seen what Christina's been up to online, and your pastor is stopping by for an unscheduled visit to discuss family matters. The conversation between Christina and her parents happened over speakerphone, which I know because little Olivia was there and apparently has trouble keeping her mouth shut when she's been drinking. According to her tearful account to anyone who would listen, their father's exact words were, "We didn't raise you to behave like a common whore, and we won't pretend we did just to spare your feelings." Helen, ever the supportive mother, chimed in with, "How could you do this to our family? How are we supposed to show our faces at church knowing that everyone has seen you doing those things?" And just like that, Christina Ward became an orphan at 27. Her parents didn't just disown her, they actively scrubbed her existence from their lives like she was a stain they were trying to bleach out of the family fabric. Photos came down from the mantle, her childhood bedroom got converted into a craft room, and Christmas card lists were suddenly one name shorter. The social ostracism was swift and merciless. The same community that had celebrated her engagement and planned to attend our wedding suddenly treated her like she was carrying the plague. Former friends crossed the street to avoid awkward conversations. Neighbors who used to chat over the fence suddenly found pressing reasons to go inside whenever she appeared. The local coffee shop where she'd been a regular for years started serving her with the kind of cold efficiency usually reserved for difficult customers who never tip. But the real entertainment value came from watching the domino effect spread to her co-conspirators. Becca Lewis, the mastermind behind the whole operation, found herself dealing with some serious relationship turbulence when her fiancé Michael discovered exactly what kind of maid-of-honor duties she'd been performing in Miami. Turns out Michael was one of those old-fashioned guys who thought fidelity mattered in a relationship. Imagine that. Their breakup was spectacular enough to warrant its own social media subplot. Michael didn't just dump Becca. He did it publicly, posting a lengthy Facebook status that began with, "When someone shows you who they really are, believe them," and ended with, "Some mistakes can't be forgiven, and some trust can't be rebuilt." He even tagged her in it, just to make sure everyone knew exactly who he was talking about. Two of the other bridesmaids, Sarah and Jennifer, both married with children, suddenly found themselves explaining to their husbands why they'd thought participating in a group sex situation was appropriate entertainment for a girls' weekend. Sarah's marriage imploded within a week, her husband filing for divorce and demanding full custody of their twins. Jennifer managed to convince her husband that she'd been too drunk to know what she was doing, but their relationship never recovered from the trust issues that followed. The most satisfying casualty was probably Amanda, the elementary school teacher who'd been so enthusiastic about the evening's activities. Turns out school districts take a dim view of educators who star in pornographic materials, even if it's technically their personal time. Parents complained, the school board got involved, and Amanda's teaching license got revoked faster than you can say moral turpitude clause. Even Olivia, sweet little Olivia who was supposed to be the innocent baby sister, found herself dealing with consequences. Her job at the nonprofit was technically safe. They couldn't fire her for legal activities conducted on her own time, but the whispers and awkward interactions made her work environment so toxic that she ended up quitting and moving across the country to start over somewhere her last name didn't come with a built-in Google search nightmare. The beautiful irony of the whole situation was that they'd all thought their Miami weekend was consequence-free fun. Just girls being girls, letting loose before Christina settled down into married life. They'd convinced themselves that what happened in Miami would stay in Miami, like some twisted variation of the Vegas rule. Instead, their private party became a very public lesson in the fact that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences come with analytics dashboards and global distribution networks. They'd wanted to have their fun and forget about it. I made sure the internet would never let them forget about anything ever again. And through it all, I remained perfectly, beautifully silent. My brother Daniel has always been the emotional one in the family. You know the type, wears his heart on his sleeve, cries at Pixar movies, and thinks every problem can be solved with a heartfelt conversation and maybe some group therapy. So when he finally tracked me down at my temporary hideout 3 weeks after the website launch, he was expecting to find his big brother curled up in a corner somewhere, drowning his sorrows in whiskey and tissues like some kind of country music cliché. Instead, he found me in my hotel room, sitting at a makeshift desk made from the room's tiny table, surrounded by printed documents, legal pads covered in handwriting, and 3 separate laptops running different monitoring programs. I looked up when he knocked, buzzed him in, and went right back to work like he was just another interruption in my busy schedule of orchestrating Christina's complete social annihilation. "Jesus Christ, Marcus," he said, staring at my setup like he'd walked into some kind of FBI operation. "What the hell is all this?" "Research," I replied, not bothering to look up from the spreadsheet I was updating with the latest casualty reports from Christina's rapidly shrinking social circle. "Due diligence. Quality control. Pick your favorite business buzzword. They all apply." Daniel sat down on the bed and watched me work for a few minutes, probably trying to process the fact that his emotionally devastated brother had apparently transformed into some kind of revenge-plotting automaton. He kept waiting for me to break down, to show some sign that I was processing this like a normal human being who'd just had his entire life imploded by the woman he loved. "Dude," he finally said, "I expected you to be a mess. I thought I'd find you drunk and crying and listening to sad music. This is fucking terrifying." I looked up from my laptop and smiled at him. Not a bitter smile or a sarcastic one, but the kind of genuine, relaxed smile I used to give clients when I was about to deliver exactly what they'd asked for, on time and under budget. Why would I be a mess? I'm handling this exactly like any other business problem. Identify the issue, research the variables, develop a comprehensive solution, and execute with precision. That's when I showed him the files. 3 accordion folders, each one meticulously organized and labeled, containing everything I'd compiled about Christina's Miami adventure and its aftermath. The first folder was labeled Documentation. Every video, every photo, every text message from that weekend, all printed out and organized chronologically with timestamps and participant identification. The second folder was Background Research, and this is where Daniel's eyes really started to widen. See, while everyone assumed I was off somewhere licking my wounds, I'd actually been quite busy. I'd hired a private investigator, a real one, not some sketchy guy from a strip mall, but a former FBI agent who specialized in corporate fraud cases. Professional, thorough, and completely discreet. Within 2 weeks, I had complete background checks on all 4 of the male performers from that night. Names, addresses, employment history, criminal records, and most importantly, medical records. Turns out one of them, a charming gentleman who went by the stage name Thunder, had been carrying a particularly nasty strain of chlamydia that he'd apparently been sharing with clients for the better part of 6 months. You had her tested? Daniel asked, flipping through the medical reports. I had all of them tested. I corrected. Anonymous tip to the health department about potential STD exposure at a private party. They were required to contact everyone who might have been at risk and recommend testing. Very responsible public health policy, don't you think? The third folder was labeled Financial Impact Assessment, because when you're dealing with a business problem, you need to understand the full cost structure. I'd calculated exactly how much money I'd save by canceling the wedding, venue deposits, catering costs, honeymoon reservations, and about $40,000 worth of other expenses that would have gone towards celebrating a marriage that was already dead before it started. But more interesting was the analysis I'd done of Christina's financial situation post-revelation. Lost income from her terminated employment, legal fees from her attempts to get the website taken down, therapy costs that her insurance didn't cover, and the security deposit she'd lost when she had to break her lease and move back in with friends because her parents had disowned her. You've been tracking her expenses? Daniel was looking at me like I'd grown a second head. Market research, I explained. If you're going to destroy someone's life, you should understand the full scope of the impact. It's about being thorough. What really freaked him out was the timeline I'd created. A detailed project plan, complete with milestones and deliverables, showing exactly how I'd orchestrated every aspect of Christina's downfall. The website launch had been Phase 1. Phase 2 was the strategic leak to her employer and key social contacts. Phase 3 involved the health department investigation. Phase 4 was ongoing monitoring and documentation of the cascading effects. This is insane, Daniel said, but there was something like admiration in his voice. I mean, it's completely psychotic, but it's also impressively organized. Thank you, I said, genuinely pleased by the compliment. I've always believed that if you're going to do something, you should do it right. Half-assed revenge is just as pathetic as half-assed anything else. I explained to him how I'd approached the whole situation like a product launch. Market research to understand the target audience, content creation and optimization for maximum impact, distribution strategy across multiple channels, and performance analytics to measure success metrics. I even had conversion tracking set up to monitor how many people who visited the website took additional actions like sharing the content or leaving comments. The beautiful thing about treating it like a business project, I told him, is that it removes all the messy emotional variables. I'm not doing this because I'm angry or hurt or want revenge. I'm doing it because it's the logical response to the problem Christina created when she decided to film herself fucking 4 strangers and then lie to my face about it for 3 weeks. Daniel was quiet for a long time, just staring at the organized chaos of my temporary war room. Finally, he asked the question I'd been waiting for. Don't you feel anything? Aren't you sad or angry or anything? I considered the question seriously because Daniel deserved an honest answer. I felt plenty, I said. For about 48 hours after I found those videos, I felt everything. Rage, heartbreak, betrayal, confusion, the whole emotional buffet. But then I realized that feelings weren't going to solve the problem. Feelings weren't going to make sure she faced appropriate consequences for her choices. Feelings weren't going to prevent her from doing this to some other poor bastard in the future. So you just turn them off. I redirected them. I corrected, channeled them into something productive. Christina thought she could have her fun and then go back to playing the innocent fiancé. She thought actions didn't have consequences as long as nobody found out. I'm simply correcting that misconception using the most efficient methods available. Daniel left that day looking like he'd witnessed something that fundamentally changed his understanding of human nature. And maybe he had, because what he'd seen wasn't his emotional, heartbroken brother grieving the loss of his relationship. What he'd seen was a businessman executing a flawless project plan with the same precision and attention to detail that had made my software company successful. And the project was running exactly on schedule. A year later, Daniel did something that pissed me off more than anything Christina had ever done, and that's saying something considering she'd literally filmed herself getting gangbanged by strangers 3 weeks before our wedding. My brother, in his infinite wisdom and complete disregard for my explicit instructions, decided that Christina deserved to know what had really gone through my head during those final weeks. Because apparently, Daniel had appointed himself the ambassador of emotional closure, and he thought everyone needed to process their feelings like we were all living in some kind of therapeutic reality show. He told me about it over beers at our usual spot, this dive bar near his apartment where the bartender minds his own business and the jukebox still plays actual CDs. Daniel had that guilty look on his face that I remembered from when we were kids, and he'd broken Mom's favorite vase or forgotten to feed our goldfish for a week straight. The look that said he'd done something he knew I wouldn't approve of, but he'd convinced himself it was for my own good. I met with Christina, he said, not even waiting for me to sit down with my beer. Just dropped it on me like a bomb while I was still shrugging out of my jacket. I stopped mid-motion and stared at him. You did what? She's been calling me for months, Marcus. Months. Leaving voicemails, sending texts, begging me to just talk to her for 5 minutes. She wanted to understand what happened, why you just disappeared like that without giving her a chance to explain. There was nothing to explain, I said, finally sitting down and taking a long pull from my beer. The videos explained everything pretty clearly. High definition, multiple camera angles, excellent audio quality. Really, Becca should have gone into documentary filmmaking professionally. But Daniel wasn't going to be deterred by my sarcasm. He had that earnest, concerned brother expression that meant he was about to try to save my soul whether I wanted it saved or not. She's a mess, Marcus. Like, completely broken. You should see her. She's lost probably 20 pounds. She looks like she hasn't slept in months, and she's basically become a hermit because she can't go anywhere without people recognizing her from your website. Good, I said, meaning it. Actions have consequences. She chose to document her extracurricular activities, and I chose to make sure those documents got the audience they deserved. Natural cause and effect. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Daniel said, leaning forward with that intensity he got when he was trying to make a point. You talk about her like she's a business problem you solved, not someone you loved for 3 years. It's not normal, Marcus. It's not healthy. So I told him what I'd told him a dozen times before, that I was fine, that I'd processed everything in my own way, and that Christina Ward could rot in whatever hole she'd crawled into for all I cared. But Daniel had already made up his mind that I needed intervention, and apparently he thought the best way to provide that intervention was to give my ex-fiancée a detailed psychological profile of my mental state during the worst period of my life. I told her about that night, he said, and my blood went cold. The night you found the videos. How you called me at 2 a.m, completely silent for like 5 minutes before you could even speak. How you described watching those videos like you were giving a police report, no emotion at all, just facts. Christina had sexual intercourse with 4 unidentified males while her friends filmed and encouraged the activity. Like you were reading from a textbook. I wanted to punch him. Actually physically assault my own brother for violating the one confidence I trusted him with during the worst moment of my life. Instead, I finished my beer and ordered another one, because alcohol seemed like a better coping mechanism than fratricide. I told her how you didn't sleep for 3 days, Daniel continued, apparently oblivious to the fact that I was considering whether killing him would be worth the prison sentence. How you sat in your office just staring at spreadsheets, running calculations on how much money you'd lose if you canceled the wedding versus how much you'd lose if you went through with it. How you told me that loving someone who didn't exist was worse than loving someone who didn't love you back. That one hit home because it was true. During those 72 hours between discovery and disappearance, I'd had plenty of time to analyze exactly what had happened to my life. The woman I'd loved, the woman I'd planned to marry, the woman I'd built my entire future around, she didn't exist. She was a fictional character that Christina had played for 3 years, a performance so convincing that I'd bought it completely. I told her about the therapy, Daniel said, and now I really did want to kill him. How you didn't go to process grief or anger or any normal human emotion. You went to make sure your exit was emotionally clean, as you put it. How you spent 6 sessions with Dr. Peterson learning techniques for emotional detachment so you could end the relationship without getting caught up in feelings that might make you change your mind. Dr. Peterson, that smug bastard with his leather-bound notebooks and his carefully neutral expressions, who charged $200 an hour to teach me how to turn off my humanity like it was a software feature I could disable. He'd been fascinated by my approach, treating our sessions like a case study in applied psychology rather than actual therapy. The thing that really got to her, Daniel continued, apparently determined to violate every confidence I'd ever shared with him, was when I explained that you'd decided the opposite of love wasn't hate. That hate would have meant she still mattered to you, still had the power to affect your emotions. You chose indifference because it was the most complete form of erasure you could achieve. Christina had cried when Daniel told her that part. Sobbed, actually, according to his detailed account of their meeting. Because she'd finally understood that I hadn't given her the dignity of anger or the respect of a confrontation or even the basic human courtesy of an explanation. I'd simply decided she no longer existed and acted accordingly. She wanted to fight for the relationship, Daniel said. That's what she told me. She said if you'd screamed at her, if you'd thrown things or demanded explanations or given her a chance to grovel and beg forgiveness, she would have done whatever it took to make things right. But you didn't give her anything to fight against. You just erased her. And that, right there, was the point Daniel had missed entirely. Christina didn't deserve a fight. She didn't deserve the chance to explain or apologize or make amends. She deserved exactly what she'd gotten. Nothing. The complete absence of my attention, my emotion, my presence in her life. She asked me if you'd ever loved her at all, Daniel said quietly. If the whole 3 years had been fake, if you'd been planning to leave her anyway. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. That you loved who you thought she was. That you would have died for the woman you thought you were marrying. But that woman never existed, and once you figured that out, there was nothing left to love. Daniel finished his beer and looked at me like he was waiting for some kind of emotional breakthrough, some moment of catharsis where I'd break down and admit that I still cared about Christina and needed closure and healing and all that therapeutic bullshit. Instead, I ordered another round and changed the subject to baseball scores. Because the truth was, Daniel had told Christina exactly what she needed to hear, that the punishment wasn't anger or revenge or even hatred. The punishment was nothing at all. 2 years later, I was living proof that the universe has a sixth sense of humor and impeccable timing when it comes to orchestrating the most awkward possible moments in human existence. There I was, standing in the organic produce section of a Whole Foods in downtown Seattle, debating whether the $30 a pound heirloom tomatoes were worth it for the salad Lauren had requested, when fate decided to play its cruelest joke yet. I heard my name whispered behind me like a prayer or a curse, and I knew immediately who it was without turning around. You know how they say you never forget your first love? Well, you also never forget the voice of the woman who taught you that love is just an elaborate con game played by people who haven't figured out how to be honest about what they really want. Marcus. I turned around slowly, like I was moving through water, and there she was. Christina Ward, or whatever name she was going by these days. The woman who had once been the center of my universe, now looking like a completely different person standing next to the overpriced organic kale. 2 years had not been kind to her, and I found myself conducting an involuntary before and after comparison like she was a cautionary tale about the long-term effects of public humiliation. The Christina I remembered had been radiant, confident, always perfectly put together like she was constantly ready for an impromptu photo shoot. This Christina looked like she'd been living under a bridge for the past 24 months. She'd lost weight. Too much weight. The kind that makes a person look fragile instead of fit. Her hair, which had once been her pride and joy, was pulled back in a simple ponytail that screamed, "I've given up on trying to look good." And her clothes, Jesus Christ. Her clothes looked like she'd picked them up from a clearance rack at Target without bothering to check if they actually fit. But it was her eyes that really got me. Those green eyes that had once sparkled with intelligence and humor now looked hollow, haunted, like she'd seen things that had fundamentally changed her understanding of how the world worked. Which, to be fair, she probably had. Having your entire life implode in high definition and then get shared with the internet tends to leave a mark. "Christina," I said, my voice perfectly neutral, like I was acknowledging a casual acquaintance I'd run into at a coffee shop. No warmth, no anger, no recognition of our shared history, just polite acknowledgement that she'd said my name and basic social courtesy demanded a response. She flinched like I'd slapped her. Actually flinched, like the sound of her own name coming from my mouth was physically painful. Which was probably fair, since I'd made that name pretty goddamn toxic over the past 2 years. "How are you?" she asked, and I could hear the desperation in her voice. The need to have this conversation, to somehow bridge the gap between who we used to be and who we were now, standing in a grocery store treating each other like strangers. "I'm well," I replied, because I was. Better than well, actually. I was thriving in ways I never could have imagined when I was wasting my time trying to build a life with someone who thought fidelity was optional as long as you didn't get caught. She nodded like that was exactly the answer she'd expected and dreaded. "I heard you got married," she said, and I could see her trying to force enthusiasm into her voice. "Congratulations. That's wonderful." "Thank you," I said, adjusting my wedding ring slightly, not consciously, but she noticed anyway. Her eyes followed the movement like it was a knife being twisted in a wound. "Lauren is a surgeon. We met through mutual friends about 18 months ago." The timeline wasn't lost on her. 18 months ago meant I'd found someone new, fallen in love, gotten engaged, and married, all while she was still dealing with the fallout from her Miami adventure. While she was probably still trying to figure out how to rebuild her life from the smoking crater I'd left behind, I'd moved on completely and built something better with someone who understood basic concepts like honesty and commitment. "That's great," she said, and I give her credit for trying to sound like she meant it. "Really great. I'm happy for you." "We're expecting our first child in the spring," I added, because sometimes truth is the most effective weapon available. "Lauren's about 5 months along. We're very excited." That one hit like a physical blow. I watched her face crumble for just a second before she managed to pull herself together and force another smile. Because we talked about kids back when we were playing house and pretending to plan a future together. We'd even picked out names, had debates about public versus private school, discussed whether we wanted to raise them in the city or move to the suburbs. Now I was having that future with someone else, someone who deserved it, while Christina got to stand in a grocery store and pretend she was happy about it. "I'm glad you found someone," she said, and her voice cracked just slightly on the word someone. "You deserve to be happy." "I am," I said simply, because it was true. I was happy in ways I'd never been with her, even during what I'd thought were our best moments. Lauren and I had built something real, something honest, something that didn't require me to constantly worry about what she was doing when I wasn't around. Christina took a deep breath, like she was preparing for something difficult. "Marcus, I know this probably isn't the time or place, but I need to say something. I need you to know how sorry I am. About everything. About what I did. About how I hurt you about." "Christina," I interrupted, my voice still perfectly calm and neutral. "It's been 2 years. Apologies are for the moment they matter. Right now, they're just words that make you feel better about yourself." She stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "But don't you want to know why? Don't you want me to explain what happened that weekend, what I was thinking, why I made those choices?" I considered the question seriously, not because I was actually curious about her motivations, but because she seemed to genuinely believe that I might be. "No," I said finally. "I really don't. What you did explained everything I needed to know about who you are. The rest is just details. I never cheated on you before," she said desperately, like that somehow made it better. "Miami was the first time, the only time. I want you to know that." And that, right there, was what made me almost feel sorry for her. Almost. "That actually makes it worse," I told her. If you'd been cheating all along, at least I could tell myself our entire relationship was a lie and move on. But knowing you threw away 3 years of building something real for one weekend of meaningless fun with strangers? That's not tragic, Christina. That's just stupid. She started crying then, right there in the produce section, tears streaming down her face while other shoppers pretended not to notice the drama unfolding next to the organic spinach. I fucked up, she whispered. I fucked up so badly, and I've spent every day for 2 years wishing I could take it back. I know, I said, and for the first time in the conversation, I felt something almost like sympathy. But wishing doesn't change anything. Actions have consequences, and those consequences don't disappear just because you regret the actions. I grabbed a bag of the expensive tomatoes and put them in my cart, ready to end this encounter and get back to my actual life. But she wasn't done yet. Do you hate me? She asked, and I could tell this was the question she'd been building up to, the one that had been eating at her for 2 years. I looked at her one last time, really looked at her, taking in the damage that her choices had caused not just to me, but to herself. No, Christina, I said. I don't hate you. Hate would mean you still matter to me. You don't. And with that, I walked away, leaving her standing there among the overpriced vegetables with tears on her face and the final confirmation that I'd erased her from my life as completely as if she'd never existed at all. Her real name, spoken one last time, closing the file forever. Today, as I sit in my home office overlooking Elliott Bay with a cup of coffee that costs more than Christina probably spends on groceries in a week, I can honestly say that life has a way of rewarding people who understand the difference between justice and revenge. Revenge is emotional, messy, and ultimately unsatisfying because it keeps you connected to the person who wronged you. Justice, on the other hand, is clean, permanent, and allows you to move on with your life while ensuring that actions have appropriate consequences. Seattle turned out to be the perfect place for a fresh start. Clean air, progressive values, and a tech industry that appreciates people who can solve complex problems without getting bogged down in emotional drama. My software company not only survived the transition from my old life, but actually thrived once I stopped dividing my attention between building a business and managing a relationship with someone who thought commitment was more of a suggestion than a binding agreement. The irony isn't lost on me that Christina's betrayal was probably the best thing that ever happened to my career. Without the distraction of trying to maintain a relationship with someone who was fundamentally dishonest, I was able to focus entirely on growing the company. We landed 3 major clients in the first year after I moved to Seattle, expanded our development team by 60%, and opened satellite offices in Portland and Vancouver. Success, it turns out, is much easier to achieve when you're not constantly wondering what your significant other is doing behind your back. But the real victory isn't professional, it's personal. Lauren Walsh walked into my life about 18 months after the Christina debacle, and she's everything my ex-fiancé pretended to be, but never actually was. She's a cardiac surgeon at Seattle Children's Hospital, which means she's brilliant, dedicated, and actually saves lives for a living instead of just talking about wanting to make a difference while working in marketing for companies that sell overpriced breakfast cereal to suburban moms. What I love most about Lauren is her complete inability to bullshit. When you spend your days literally holding children's hearts in your hands, you develop a pretty low tolerance for dishonesty and game playing. She told me on our 3rd date that she didn't have time for men who weren't serious about building something real, and she meant it. No mixed signals, no manipulation, no testing me to see if I'd chase her when she pulled away. Just straight talk from someone who knew what she wanted and wasn't afraid to ask for it. Our son is due in March, a little boy we're planning to name James, after Lauren's grandfather who was apparently some kind of legendary heart surgeon back in the day. I've been to every ultrasound appointment, every prenatal checkup, every preparation class they offer at the hospital. Not because I feel obligated to, but because I'm genuinely excited about becoming a father with someone I trust completely. That's the difference between love and whatever the hell I had with Christina. With Lauren, I never wake up wondering if she's telling me the truth about where she was last night or who she was with. I never have to check her phone or worry about what she's doing when I'm out of town on business. The anxiety that I didn't even realize I was carrying for 3 years with Christina just disappeared. Turns out, when you're with someone who's actually trustworthy, you don't spend your time looking for signs of betrayal. People ask me sometimes if I hate Christina, usually in that concerned tone that suggests they think I'm repressing some deep psychological trauma that's going to surface at an inconvenient moment and ruin my new life. The answer is always the same. Hate requires caring, and I genuinely don't care what happens to her. She's become completely irrelevant to my existence, like a plot line from a TV show I stopped watching years ago. I know she's still in Seattle, probably because she can't afford to move anywhere else after losing her job and burning through whatever savings she had on legal fees trying to get my website taken down. Daniel mentioned seeing her working at some coffee shop in Capitol Hill, which seems fitting somehow. From marketing executive to barista, a natural progression for someone who thought documenting their infidelity was a good idea. The website itself came down eventually, not because of any legal pressure, but because it had served its purpose. Christina Ward's name was permanently associated with her Miami adventure in search engine results. Social media had preserved countless screenshots and recordings, and enough people had downloaded the original content to ensure it would resurface if she ever tried to rebuild her reputation. Mission accomplished. That's the beautiful thing about the internet age. Accountability is permanent. In the old days, people could move to a new town, change their name, and reinvent themselves after making catastrophic life choices. Now, your mistakes follow you forever, which is exactly as it should be. Actions should have consequences, and those consequences should be proportional to the damage caused. Christina didn't just cheat on me. She documented it, celebrated it, and then lied to my face about it for weeks while I planned our wedding like an idiot. She chose to create permanent evidence of her betrayal, so I simply made sure that evidence got the audience it deserved. Poetic justice, delivered through technology and social media virality. The most satisfying part isn't her downfall, it's my complete indifference to it. I don't check up on her, don't ask Daniel for updates, don't Google her name to see if she's managed to crawl out of the hole she dug for herself. She exists in my mind only as a cautionary tale about the importance of thoroughly vetting potential life partners before making long-term commitments. Lauren knows the whole story, obviously. I told her everything on our 6th date, when things were getting serious enough that she deserved to know why I was so careful about trust and commitment. Her response was perfect. So you found out your ex was a liar and a cheater, and instead of wasting years trying to fix her, you moved on and built a better life. That sounds like healthy decision-making to me. No drama, no jealousy, no insecurity about competing with my past. Just a practical assessment from someone who understands that people's previous choices are usually excellent predictors of their future behavior. Some people might call what I did to Christina cruel or disproportionate. I call it educational. She learned that actions have consequences. Her friends learned that enabling bad behavior makes you complicit in those consequences, and any future partners she might have will be able to make informed decisions about whether they want to risk getting involved with someone who thinks fidelity is optional. The world is a slightly more honest place because of what I did, and I sleep perfectly well at night knowing that. Silence has always been the loudest answer. And in that silence, I didn't just win. I built something infinitely better than what I lost.